Hey everyone, welcome to another installment of Harry Potter Theory. Today I've got something really special for you, a compilation featuring the history behind nearly every single magical location of significance in the wizarding world. This video will feature Diagon Alley, Azkaban, Gringotts, the Ministry of Magic, Hogsmeade, the Leaky Cauldron, Godric's Hollow, every wizarding school, every wizarding prison, the Forbidden Forest, and more. I'm heading off on a trip to the Harry Potter motherland this week, Edinburgh, so I figured this would be the perfect opportunity to take a look back at years of content and put something special together. Please note that due to the long time frame over which these videos were produced, there may be some variation in audio levels and a small amount of repeated information, though this should be minimal. Anyway, without further ado, let's dive into this comprehensive history of nearly every Wizarding World location. What do you know about Diagon Alley? Because it's far more than just a shopping centre for Britain's wizards and witches. Diagon Alley's history stretches back hundreds of years and survived countless goblin rebellions, wars with dark wizards, and even witch hunts. Today, we're going to take a look at Diagon Alley's secret history and find out how it came to be. Medieval era. Nobody really knows when the first store opened its doors in Diagon Alley, but rest assured there have been quite a few theories. After all, we know that Gringotts Wizarding Bank was established in 1474, just a century after the famous economic crash that shook the wizarding world to its core. It would make sense if Diagon Alley developed after the goblins established such a massive financial centre. Gringotts would eventually become one of the most important daily fixtures in the entire wizarding world of Britain, and hundreds of wizards would regularly visit on a daily basis. Establishing an apothecary or one shop nearby was a sure way to catch customers who had galleons to spend. But others might think that Diagon Alley got its start on the day the Leaky Cauldron opened its doors. It's written within that pub's very address, or so it seems. Since the Leaky Cauldron's posted address is number 1 Diagon Alley, many wizarding historians supposed that the establishment of the famous pub and inn marked the beginning of Diagon Alley, but the truth is probably somewhere in between. Sometime in the medieval era, the part of London that would eventually become Diagon Alley must have been popular with local witches and wizards. Perhaps, even then, when it was just a mud-filled street with a few cobblestone patches, Ollivander's One Shop and a few other magical vendors decided to plant their roots. Eventually, the area must have become so well known amongst wizards that the goblins of the era decided to construct Gringotts Bank there. And then, all of the other shops, which Harry and his friends knew so well, surely followed suit. Evolution. Now, of all the places in the wizarding world, Diagon Alley strangely avoided the history books for most of its existence. In fact, it wasn't until the second rise of Voldemort and the start of Harry Potter's journey at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry that the street shows up often in records. But as we often like to do, we can certainly make a few educated guesses as to how this street evolved. With so much of the wizarding world's wealth concentrated in a single street, the stores that developed around it were crucial for the everyday life of witches and wizards. By this point in time, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry had been open for some centuries. Although the school still lacked many of the familiar facets that Harry Potter would come to love during his time there, Hogwarts was quite well known in Britain, and attending that school or any other school was important for the 28 pureblood families that populated the British Isles, which meant they'd do anything to make sure their child had the best robes, wands, and potion supplies. And where were they going to buy those items if not Diagon Alley? During this era, the ancestors of some of the most famous wizards of the 20th century frequented Diagon Alley as they prepared their children for the coming school year. If you walked around any corner, you'd be sure to find a gang of Sirius Black's forefathers, or James Potter's great-great-great-great-grandparents. You'd likely even find a few Weasleys or Malfoys, who came over from France during the Norman Conquest. List of shops. By the time Harry Potter journeyed to Diagon Alley, along with Rubeus Hagrid, the entire street was filled with dozens of stores, from amanuensis quills to Aesop's Owl Emporium. and after the International Statute of Wizarding Secrecy, the street became even harder to find, as it was concealed behind countless enchantments and charms. Over the centuries, innumerable stores popped up alongside Gringotts and added to the culture of the alley. So let's take a moment and peruse through a few of these. If you were in the mood for tricks and jokes, you'd be best served by Gamble and Jape's Wizarding Joke Shop. Before Fred and George left Hogwarts to open their own store, the Weasley twins would often visit Gamble and Jape's to gather all they would need to terrorize August Filch during the upcoming school year. The store held hundreds of items, but they were most famous for Dr. Filibuster's fabulous wet start, no-heat fireworks, which could be ignited with just a bit of water. And if you needed some of the finest supplies for class, you could stop by the Magical Menagerie. Located on the north side of Diagon Alley, right across from the sweet shop where Hagrid bought Harry a cone of chocolate and raspberry ice cream, the Magical Menagerie carried almost every type of magical pet in the wizarding world. There were puffskin, crested toads, ferrets, bats, and of course owls. Ron and Hermione would often visit the Magical Menagerie whenever they needed to get ointments or digestive cures for their pets. Now, if you had a sharp eye, you might notice that among the many artisan stores within Diagon Alley, there were plenty of second-hand shops as well. From second-hand robes to second-hand books, any wizard or witch on a budget would have found anything they needed. But if you had galleons to spend, you were welcome to use them too. At Madame Malkin's Robes for All Occasions, you could find expertly crafted robes and dresses, and at Ollivander's Wand Shop, you could get your hands on the most important tool a wizard would ever need, his wand. The wand shop claimed to have been in operation since 382 BC, but whether they had been in Diagon Alley all that time, or had moved there after having set up shop somewhere else, was one of the hottest debates among historians of the time. As you might recall, Ollivander's crafted Harry Potter's wand, which just so happened to be the twin to Lord Voldemort's. As you wandered around the district, you'd also notice that there were plenty of businesses that weren't really open to the public. These were the offices of some of the most important publishers in the wizarding world, from the Daily Prophet to the Ministry Press. Even obscure as books, the publishers behind Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them had an office in the alley. If you want a list of all of the shops in Diagon Alley, leave a comment down below. Spin-offs. But when you walked around Diagon Alley, you might notice that there were a few odd twists and turns that might tempt you off the main street. If you took any of those routes, you might find yourself at a less reputable market that intersected Diagon Alley.
Diagon Alley.
One of these, Nocturn Alley, would send a shiver down any normal wizard or witch. This street was famous for housing shops that sold dark relics and magical items. Its most famous shop, Borgin and Burkes, was even a temporary employer for a young Tom Riddle. That shop held no shortage of dangerous items, from cursed necklaces to the Hand of Glory. But just like the main district of Diagon Alley, Nocturne had plenty of other shops to tempt a dark wizard or witch. In fact, by the time Harry Potter enrolled at Hogwarts, Nocturne Alley's reputation seemed to abate, as many pureblood families shopped there, instead of Diagon Alley. Amongst Nocturne's many shops, there were dark relic vendors like Cobb and Webb, Shiver Wretch's venoms and poisons for all of your nefarious needs, and even a dark alternative to the Leaky Cauldron, a pub known as the White Wyvern. But Nocturne was just one of the many offshoots from the main Diagon Alley district. If you needed to find a new house elf, you could always venture to the nearby district of Carket Market, where the house elf placement agency would sort you out. Or if you wanted to buy the perfect troll puppet for your nephew or niece, you could go to Horizont Alley and visit Periwinkle's Playthings, where their wide array of toys and marionettes drew long lines. Conclusion. Diagon Alley was the beating heart of the wizarding community. Besides Hogwarts, there was hardly any other place where so many wizards could comfortably go about town, embracing the most joyful part of the magical world. Whether they were taking a family stroll to Sugarplum's sweet shop for a nice Sunday trip, or scheduling their summer vacation at the office of Terror Tours, Diagon Alley was as important for wizards as just about anything else in their lives. And even though the streets of the shopping district often cleared out during times of conflict, as they did during Lord Voldemort's second rise, they'd come right back to life as soon as the coast was clear. Today we'll be discussing the history of the British Ministry of Magic. Of course, there are a lot of things that took place there throughout the Harry Potter series, but today we'll be focusing on what happened prior to our dear boy Harry showing up on the wizarding scene. So without further ado, let's get started, shall we? What is the Ministry of Magic? Formed in 1707, the British Ministry of Magic is the main governing body of the magical community of the United Kingdom and Ireland. It was created to preserve magical law within Great Britain and represent these countries to the larger wizarding world. Its formation came as a direct result of the previously created Wizards' Council. Prior to 1707, the Wizards' Council was the longest-serving, though not the only, body to govern the magical community in Britain. After the imposition of the International Statute of Secrecy in 1692, however, the wizarding community needed a more highly structured, organized, and more complex governing structure than they had hitherto used to support, regulate, and communicate with a community in hiding. This, of course, led to what is now known as the Ministry of Magic. Employees of the ministry are largely unelected, with the exception of the minister, who is voted in by Great Britain's wizarding community. As seen in the Fantastic Beasts films, many other countries in the wizarding world have their own ministries of magic, including France, Germany, and Bulgaria. The United States also has a magical governing body, but as we learned in Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, their government is called the Magical Congress of the United States of America, or MACUSA. The location of the ministry and how to access it. The headquarters for the British Ministry of Magic is located well beneath His Majesty's Treasury Building in central London, deep underground. Witches and wizards employed by the ministry can enter by flue network or apparition. However, during Voldemort's rise to power in the 1990s, employees of lower rank were forced to enter the ministry by way of a toilet network. Visitors to the ministry can access the building from above ground through a nearby disconnected red telephone box by dialing the word magic. Ministry events of the 18th century. As mentioned earlier, the British Ministry of Magic was founded at the beginning of the 18th century in 1707. Upon its establishment, the former chief warlock of the Wizengamot, Ulick Gamp, assumed the role of the first ever Minister for Magic in Great Britain. For those of you who may not recall, the Wizengamot is Britain's wizarding High Court of Law and Parliament, which predates the ministry. In any case, during Minister Gamp's term, he founded the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, meaning that this department has existed since the early 18th century. It was also during this time that the ministry guided its citizens through the wizarding world's adjustment to the International Statute of Secrecy of 1692. The years to follow were formative in the ministry's foundational operations. For example, in 1717, the ministry officially classified the Imperius, Cruciatus, and Avada Kedavra curses as the unforgivable curses. And then, sometime during the next Minister for Magic's term between 1718 and 1726, Azkaban was made into the official wizarding prison. This idea came from Damocles Rao, the minister at the time, who chose Azkaban as the location for the jail over the remote Hebridean island, despite much protest from the wizarding community. The next Minister for Magic, Perseus Parkinson, attempted to pass a bill which would have made it illegal to marry muggles, a law which, as we know, was enforced in the United States. However, the bill never passed in the UK, and Parkinson was voted out soon after. Sometime between 1747 and 1752, the ministry faced a goblin and werewolf rebellion, which apparently was rather mismanaged by the minister at the time, Albert Boot. Quite unfortunately, his successor, Basil Flack, did little better, as he was only in office for a mere 2 months before being removed from the position. Flack is the shortest-serving minister to ever hold the position within the ministry. Fortunately, the ministry was able to quell a number of revolts after this time during the rule of Hephaestus Gore. Gore also led the ministry's renovation of Azkaban prison's facilities. In 1782, the ministry secretly convened with the Muggle government to support the Prime Minister at the time, Lord Frederick North, with King George III's ailing mental health. Unfortunately, this connection only served to call Lord North's sanity into question for his rumoured belief in wizards. 1798 then saw the induction of the ministry's first female minister for magic, Artemisia Lufkin. During her 13 years in office, she established the Department of International Magical Cooperation and held the Quidditch World Cup for the first time in Britain. 19th century ministers and events. Following Lufkin's time in office, Grogan Stump served as minister from 1811 to 1819 and led the ministry's establishment of the Department of Magical Games and Sports. Then, under the rule of Ottoline Gamble, sometime between 1827 and 1835, the ministry saw the creation of multiple committees whose purpose was to investigate Muggles and their intelligence. These ministry committees uncovered that many Muggles were indeed smarter than the wizarding community had previously believed. The Department of Mysteries was almost closed down sometime between 1835 and 1841, due to the reactionary nature of the minister at the time, Rodolphus Lestrange. However, Lestrange was outed from office before he could officially instate the closure. The next sitting minister, Hortensia Millifort, introduced more legislation to the ministry between 1841 and 1849 than any other witch or wizard who's held the position. Evidently, much of what the ministry pushed through was indeed useful. However, a bit of it was rather wearisome and is likely what led to the end of Millifort's term in office. During Queen Victoria's reign of England, the monarch unknowingly befriended witch and minister for magic Evangeline Orpington. This friendship may have been what motivated Orpington to, allegedly, get the ministry involved in the Crimean War, an act which would have been quite illegal at the time. Then, between the years of 1858 and 1865, the ministry experienced a welcome period of peace under the governance of Minister for Magic, Dugald MacPhail. Immediately following MacPhail's term, the ministry then saw its longest ever serving minister, one Faris Spouthole Spavin, who served for nearly 40 years, from 1865 to 1903. Spavin was 147 when he finally left office, at which point he had survived an assassination attempt from a centaur and attended Queen Victoria's funeral. During Spavin's term, the ministry once again faced the rise of a goblin rebellion in the late 1800s, led by a goblin named Ranrock. 20th century ministers and events. During the Muggles' First World War, the ministry passed emergency legislation which made it illegal for the wizarding community in Britain to involve themselves in the warfare. This was done under Minister Archer Evermond, who feared participating in the Great War would risk mass infractions of the International Statute of Secrecy. This legislation was largely ignored, with thousands of witches and wizards defying the law in order to help their Muggle neighbours. The ministry was then wildly unprepared to meet the growing threat of Gellert Grindelwald in the 1920s and 30s, due to the minister at the time, Hector Fawley, not taking Grindelwald's rise to power seriously. As a result, the ministry ousted Fawley to pay for his insufficient action and ineptitude. While Winston Churchill was in office, however, the ministry enjoyed a good working relationship with the Muggle Parliament, primarily thanks to the Minister for Magic between 1939 and 1948, Leonard Spencer Moon. In large contrast, about a decade later, the Minister for Magic between 1959 and 1962, Ignatius Tuft, attempted to institute a controversial Dementor breeding program. Fortunately, the ministry forced Tuft out of office before he was able to turn this terrifying program into a reality. In 1962, nearly 250 years after its formation, the Ministry of Magic inducted its first ever Muggle-born Minister for Magic, Nobby Leach. His appointment as minister caused many pure-blood ministry employees to resign in protest, and in the late 1960s, while Eugenia Jenkins was in office, the ministry dealt with a bout of pure-blood riots, which took place during Squib rights marches. Then, in response to Lord Voldemort's first rise to power in the 1970s, the ministry attempted to bolster its protection against the Dark Wizard with efforts such as placing more Dementors around Azkaban. Fortunately, Voldemort's first defeat by Harry Potter occurred in 1981, making additional security unnecessary. The Dark Lord's disappearance led to a mass celebration among the wizarding community in Britain. These celebrations, caused a number of breaches against the International Statute of Secrecy, leaving the ministry to defend the actions of its citizens against the International Confederation of Wizards. Apparently, the Minister for Magic at the time, Millicent Bagnold, responded with the now infamous statement of, "I assert our inalienable right to party." It's known by many among the wizarding community that the ministry wanted Albus Dumbledore to assume the position of British Minister for Magic after Bagnold's retirement in 1990, but of course he turned it down and the job went instead to Cornelius Fudge, who was the minister in power at the start of the Harry Potter series. Much of what took place at the ministry after Harry Potter's arrival at Hogwarts you likely know well, but as a brief recap of events, in 1996 the Ministry of Magic was breached by Death Eaters and Hogwarts students alike, including Harry and his friends. This breach led to what would become known as the Battle of the Department of Mysteries, sometimes also referred to as the Battle of the Ministry of Magic. Rufus Scrimgeour was the minister to serve after Fudge was forced out of office due to his refusal to believe that Voldemort had returned. Tragically, Scrimgeour was then murdered by the Dark Lord himself while still in office. Pius Thickness then served for only a year, operating under duress of the Imperius Curse. His term has therefore been omitted from most official ministry records. Since the second defeat of Lord Voldemort, the ministry has experienced a time of relative peace, with Kingsley Shacklebolt serving until 1998 and Hermione Granger taking over in 2019. Today we'll be discussing the history of Gringotts Wizarding Bank, as well as the magical money that it uses to fuel the wizarding economy. Gringotts was first founded in the late 15th century during the year of 1474 by a goblin who went by the name, you guessed it, Gringott. Little is known about the goblin Gringott and his formative years, or even how old he was when he founded the bank that would become the safest place for valuables in the wizarding world. What we do know is that he is featured on his own chocolate frog card, alongside the likes of famous witches and wizards such as Albus Dumbledore and Merlin. In a small way, this signifies the incredible accomplishment Gringott achieved by creating the first ever bank for magical society. The bank itself is located on the north side of the hidden locale Diagon Alley, a street magically concealed from muggles and only visited by those who are part of the wizarding world. Accessible via the wizarding pub The Leaky Cauldron, which sits upon the muggle road of Charing Cross Road, Gringotts is one of the most frequented magical establishments within central London. This, of course, is due to the fact that Gringotts is the only wizarding bank in Britain, meaning that any witch or wizard who wishes to keep their gold or other valuables safe inside a proper magical bank would need to travel to Britain and visit Gringotts to do so. Of course, this is rather unbelievable to us muggles, who seem to have a bank on every other street corner, which is made clear by Harry's reaction the first time Hagrid tells him of Gringotts' existence. Nah, first stop for us is Gringotts, Wizard's Bank. Have a sausage, they're not bad cold, and I wouldn't say no to a bit of your birthday cake, neither. Wizards have banks? Just the one, Gringotts, run by goblins. Harry dropped the bit of sausage he was holding. Goblins? Well, perhaps Harry was actually more surprised by Hagrid's mention of goblins. But I digress. Immediately noticeable to anyone who steps foot into Diagon Alley, Gringotts is taller than every other shop on the street, and has a brilliant white exterior with a set of bronze outer doors, all of which Harry admires as he approaches the bank for the first time. Gringotts, said Hagrid. They had reached a snowy white building which towered over the other little shops. Standing beside its burnished bronze doors, wearing a uniform of scarlet and gold was... Yeah, that's a goblin, said Hagrid quietly, as they walked up the white stone steps towards him. Then, just inside the bronze exterior doors, is a second set of inner doors, silver in material and colours, with the following words of warning engraved upon them. Enter, stranger, but take heed of what awaits the sin of greed, for those who take but do not earn must pay most dearly in their turn. So if you seek beneath our floors a treasure that was never yours, thief, you have been warned, beware of finding more than treasure there. Through these silver doors, and upon actually entering the inner hall of the building, Visitors are met by a large space made entirely of marble. Behind one long counter, there are more than 100 high-top stools made for the goblins who work there to sit upon and deal with the bank's patrons, and leading off the marble hall are too many doors to count. Presumably since its opening, Gringotts has been run by goblins. However, it would seem that not long after it opened its doors, the Ministry of Magic assumed management of the bank. The exact date of this takeover is unknown, but in the centuries that followed, it is one of the many controversies that have fueled the conflict between goblins and wizard kind. Despite the Ministry having a hand in running Gringotts, and witches and wizards being the primary clientele of the bank, goblins do continue to run the establishment in a way that no other species can. Aside from the fact that goblins have an innate ability to understand finances and the economy, they are also able to wield wandless magic that is beyond the grasp of witches and wizards. It is through this specific brand of magic that goblins are able to keep the valuables that have been deposited in Gringotts safe. For example, while some vaults use tiny golden keys to access their contents, such as Harry's vault, there are other, more secure vaults that require the magical touch of a goblin who is employed by the bank in order to open their doors. This is the case with both Bellatrix Lestrange's vault, which Harry, Ron and Hermione access with the help of the goblin Griphook in 1998, and Albus Dumbledore's Vault 713, which Hagrid retrieves the Philosopher's Stone from in 1991, once again alongside the goblin Griphook. "Stand back," said Griphook importantly. He stoked the door gently with one of his long fingers, and it simply melted away. "If anyone but a Gringotts goblin tried that, they'd be sucked through the door and trapped in there," said Griphook. "How often do you check to see if anyone's inside?" Harry asked. "About once every 10 years, said Griphook, with a rather nasty grin. To access any of these vaults with Gringotts, one must first descend underground, as the majority of the bank actually sprawls deep below the City of London. Upon leaving the marbled entrance hall, patrons of the bank find themselves in a maze of cavernous tunnels lit only by torches, and which carry on for miles. Navigation through the steeply descending tunnels is done via small, mine-like carts that only Gringotts goblins are able to operate, and which can only go at one speed. The deeper down you go, the more highly secure the vaults become. Alongside an underground lake and ravine, there are also incredibly powerful enchantments used to prevent thieves from successfully robbing the bank. From what little we know, some of these spells and enchantments include the Thief's Downfall, which is a waterfall that descends upon any number of paths that the mine-like carts travel, and effectively washes away all magic from whomever is occupying the cart. Some of the higher security vaults also use magical defenses such as the Gemino and Flagrante curses, which, when placed on an item of value, burns to the touch and then multiplies, making worthless copies of the item. These magical defenses are just some of the presumed enchantments placed on the vaults and within the maze of tunnels meant to deter people from trying to rob Gringotts, which is further explained by Hagrid to Harry back in 1991, before they visited the bank for the first time. "Yeah, so you'd be mad to try and rob it, I'll tell you that. Never mess with goblins, Harry. Gringotts is the safest place in the world for anything you want to keep safe. Except maybe Hogwarts." "Why would you be mad to try and rob Gringotts?" Harry asked. "Spells, enchantments," said Hagrid, unfolding his newspaper as he spoke. "They say there's a dragon guarding the high security vaults, and then you've got to find your way. Gringotts is hundreds of miles under London, see? Deep under the underground. You'd die of hunger trying to get out, even if you did manage to get your hands on something. Oh yes, and there's also a dragon. While for many the dragon guarding the deep vaults of Gringotts is only a myth, Harry, Ron and Hermione discovered for certain that it was incredibly real when they broke into Gringotts in 1998. A gigantic dragon was tethered to the ground in front of them, barring access to 4 or 5 of the deepest vaults in the place. The beast's scales had turned pale and flaky during its long incarceration under the ground. Its eyes were milkily pink. Both rear legs bore heavy cuffs from which chains led to enormous pegs driven deep into the rocky floor. Its great, spiked wings folded close to its body would have filled the chamber if it spread them, and when it turned its ugly head toward them, it roared with a noise that made the rock tremble. opened its mouth and spat a jet of fire that sent them running back up the passageway. This dragon is then used by the trio to escape from Gringotts, making their adventure into the bowels of the bank one of the only known successful breaches in its entire history. Aside from this one incident, however, Gringotts has been the premier establishment for magical society to keep their valuables safe since the 15th century, housing everything from gold to jewels, treasure, and even rare magical artifacts like the Philosopher's Stone. And while us muggles are acutely aware of jewels and treasure, the gold I'm referring to here is not of the muggle variety, although I'm sure some witches and wizards do in fact choose to house bars of gold and other items made of pure gold in their vaults. But no, the gold I'm referring to, of course, is the gold galleon, the most valuable currency in magical society, at least in Britain. Cast by goblins, each galleon has a series of numbers around its edges to represent the goblin who made it. Presumably, this process of creating a galleon is done exclusively by Gringotts goblins, as the heads sign of the coin is stamped with the words Gringotts Bank. On the same side of this golden piece of currency is also the head of a wizard, with the flip side of the coin, known as the tail side, showcasing a dragon and the words Unum Galleon. Unum is Latin and may be interpreted as one, meaning the gold coins are imprinted with the words one galleon. It's believed that the first batch of galleons were cast sometime in the 1200s, as by the middle of the 13th century they were in circulation throughout the wizarding community in Britain. At this point in time, it's unclear whether or not the lesser value coins of modern times existed yet. Today, however, there are 3 different types of British currency within the wizarding world, including the gold galleon. In addition to the galleon, there is also the silver sickle and the bronze knut. The value of each of these coins are 17 silver sickles to a galleon and 29 knuts to a sickle. Similarly to the galleon, the sickle and the knut are both cast by Gringotts goblins and have serial numbers imprinted along their edges to signify the goblin who made them. And, as you may have guessed, similarly to the Muggle world, the wizarding world also has various currencies across the globe. In America, they use the dragon, and in France, it's believed that the currency used by witches and wizards is the bezant. While the general history of the French bezant and when exactly it went into circulation is unknown, the American dragget is said to have been in use in the United States since at least the 1700s. There is also the possibility that the dragget has a lesser value subunit called the sprink. For those of you who may be wondering what the conversion rate is between Muggle money and wizarding money, you're not alone. There are entire websites dedicated to this exact thing. I've taken a deep dive into some of these, and last I checked, 1 galleon was the equivalent of 5 British pounds. Of course, since there are a many number of Muggle-born witches and wizards across the globe, there is a rather large population within the wizarding world which requires currency exchange services. As such, Gringotts is one of the only known places in the entire world where Muggle-borns can exchange their money for galleons, sickles, and knuts. We even see this exchange process about to happen in 1992, when the Weasley family encounters Hermione Granger and her Muggle parents on their way to exchange their British pounds for wizarding currency. "But you're Muggles," said Mr. Weasley delightedly. "We must have a drink. What's that you've got there? Oh, you're changing Muggle money. Molly, look." He pointed excitedly at the £10 notes in Mr. Granger's hand. Presumably, if the bank is willing to exchange British pounds, then they likely also accept other foreign Muggle currency, as well as foreign magical money. Although it hardly seems fair that a Muggle-born student attending Ilvermorny School of Witchcraft and Wizardry in the United States would need to come all the way over to London in order to exchange their American dollars to dragons. Hopefully, the staff at Ilvermorny has some sort of unofficial banking exchange system in place for those students. In any case, currency that is brought to Gringotts that is not galleons, sickles, or knuts is believed to be dealt with by the goblins who work at the bank. As these goblins are responsible for casting and keeping the primary currency of the British wizarding world, it seems rather unlikely that they would then keep Muggle money and other foreign currency on hand, as they wouldn't want it to compete with their own coins. It's therefore likely that Gringotts and his goblins have a process for reintegrating these currencies back into circulation within their various economies. Since both Muggle money and foreign magical currency holds value, they obviously wouldn't just throw it away. Altogether more likely, at least to me, is the idea that perhaps goblins laundered British pounds, American dollars, and other Muggle currencies back out into Muggle communities by way of fronts. As for the magical monies from other countries, they probably just send that back by way of some form of goblin magic. As with Muggle money, there are also instances of counterfeit magical currency. The most common example of counterfeit wizarding money is leprechaun gold. These coins are said to be made by leprechauns and are commonly found among gamblers, specifically at Quidditch matches. Although they closely resemble real gold galleons, and sometimes make their way into circulations within the wizarding economy, they are distinctly different in a number of ways. For one, leprechaun gold will vanish after only a few hours. These coins can also be duplicated, whereas real galleons cannot be. That said, even if leprechaun gold made its way to Gringotts and lasted long enough for a goblin to inspect it, the employees of the bank are easily able to tell them apart from the real thing, as seen by Harry, Ron and Hermione during their 1998 break-in. The long counter was manned by goblins sitting on high stools, serving the first customers of the day. Hermione, Ron and Travers headed towards an old goblin who was examining a thick gold coin through an eyeglass. Hermione allowed Travers to step ahead of her on the pretext of explaining features of the hall to Ron. The goblin tossed the coin he was holding aside, said to nobody in particular, "Leprechaun," and then greeted Travers, who passed over a tiny golden key, which was examined and given back to him. Today, we're going to be discussing the complete history of the Forbidden Forest, a common backdrop for important moments throughout the Harry Potter series for both Harry, his friends, and his enemies. As many of you will remember, the Forbidden Forest is first introduced in the Philosopher's Stone as a scary, dark place where students are not allowed to enter, never mind to roam about and explore. Of course, one very large caveat to this rule is if those same students ever find themselves in a bit of trouble. As much as it really makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, a punishment bestowed upon multiple students over the years, including Harry, Hermione Granger, Neville Longbottom, and Draco Malfoy in the first installment of the series, is to send them into the Forbidden Forest. This form of detention is meant to help Hagrid with random duties required in the upkeep of the portion of the forest that resides on school property. As this was the detention they were given for merely being out of bed after hours, makes one wonder what the punishment would have been for actually going into the forest. More time spent in the forest? Like I said, it really doesn't make any sense at all. Anyway, I'd like to start off today's video with a brief summary of the Forbidden Forest as we know it through Harry Potter, because although there are many fantastical locations and magical places in which Harry and his friends visit throughout the novels and films alike, it may not be immediately apparent just how important the Forbidden Forest is to the series. Now, it's a very typical trope for an enchanted forest, whether filled with light, magic, or dark, to represent a way to achieve transformation for those who enter it. What I mean is that magical forests are often used as a literary device to be a catalyst of change for any number of fictional characters. They enter the forest as one version of themselves and emerge forever transformed. All this to say that I do, indeed, believe that there are quite a few transformations that take place within the Forbidden Forest, many of which I will get into later in the video. But, in my opinion, it's quite evident that the main transformation that takes place in this series is at the very end of the 7th book, which, as many of you will know, is the 8th movie, and is directly related to the protagonist of the story, our dear boy, Harry. The scene that I'm referring to is the one in which Harry enters the Forbidden Forest as a human Horcrux of Voldemort, right before the Battle of Hogwarts breaks out. Harry is ready to face immortality and make the ultimate sacrifice, die in an effort to defeat the Dark Lord once and for all. And yet, as we all know, in dying, Harry fails quite miserably, as on his journey to the afterlife, he ends up in limbo, having, at long last, a frank and honest discussion with former headmaster Albus Dumbledore, only to then come back from the dead without the fragment of Voldemort's soul inside of him. Without the Horcrux inside of him, Harry is no longer connected to the Dark Lord. In summary, Harry goes from condemned wizard harboring a Horcrux to a very much alive, confident young wizard, San Horcrux. Delightful little bit of transformation, if I do say so myself. No more connection to the baddie, Lord Voldemort. The setting of the Forbidden Forest for all of this also makes complete sense, given that it has been said that this location is one of J.K. Rowling's absolute favourites within Hogwarts. Of course, this little tidbit is not completely relevant to the forest's history itself, but it certainly supports the idea as to why Rowling may have chosen a magical forest like this to represent Harry's final and most pivotal transformation of the series. Alright, so knowing that the forest was likely created by Rowling as a meaningful place for Harry to finally overcome his long-standing and ill-begotten connection with Voldemort, let's dive into the many smaller transformations and events that took place within the forest throughout the series. Book 1, The Philosopher's Stone. As briefly mentioned at the start of the video, in the Philosopher's Stone, Harry, along with Hermione, Neville and Draco, were all sent into the Forbidden Forest as a form of detention. They were meant to accompany Hagrid in an effort to locate a unicorn known to have been badly injured somewhere within the Dark Woods. Since Hagrid isn't, shall we say, the best with children, he allows the group to split up in order to cover more ground as they search for the injured unicorn. Harry and Draco break off from the others, only to come upon a hooded figure feasting upon the blood of the unicorn they've been looking for. As we later find out, this hooded figure is actually a shadow version of Voldemort. Upon being in such close proximity to the Dark Lord, Harry's scar begins to sear with pain and he passes out. Fortunately for Harry, a friendly centaur by the name of Frenzy finds him and assists him back to the castle, but not before explaining to him that the dark, hooded thing that Harry saw feasting upon the unicorn was actually Voldemort attempting to return to his full strength by way of drinking the unicorn's blood. In terms of transformation, what we see here is Voldemort setting his path in motion to go from the shadowy glimpse of his former self that he's been stuck as for more than a decade, back towards his full strength as the Dark Lord. Book 2, The Chamber of Secrets. Ah yes, the Chamber of Secrets presents us with a whole new perspective on what fearsome creatures lurk within the Forbidden Forest. For it's within this installment of the series that we are first introduced to the forest's Acromantula colony, a group of gigantic spiders led by the Acromantula, fondly known by Hagrid as Aragog. This is when we see Ron come face to face with one of his greatest fears, spiders. And not just any spiders, enormous ones. I would say that Ron's ability to accompany Harry into the colony's home shows great courage and growth for Ron. So, although small, I would argue that this is our transformation within the forest, within the Chamber of Secrets. Book 3, The Prisoner of Azkaban. There's also the few times that certain care of magical creatures lessons took place in the Forbidden Forest, which we see in great detail in The Prisoner of Azkaban. For example, this is where Hagrid teaches the students about hippogriffs. It's also where we first meet Buckbeak. Of course, the Forbidden Forest plays a much larger part in terms of transformations later on in the novel. To start, it's where Lupin runs to after he has accidentally transformed into a werewolf. Presumably, he changes back into a human within the forest. There's also a much more complex transformation which occurs to Harry within the forest near the end of The Prisoner of Azkaban. At the forest's Black Lake, we see Dementors almost take the souls of Harry, Hermione, and Sirius, but not before a future version of Harry banishes the Dementors away with his Patronus. This means that the forest is the very first place that Harry is able to successfully cast his Patronus. This sets into motion a more confident version of Harry, allowing himself to realize that he may be capable of more than he thought. Book 4, The Goblet of Fire. Within the fourth novel and film, the Forbidden Forest is used as a way to conceal the dragons that are to be involved in one of the tasks of the Triwizard Tournament. As part of the magical inter-school tournament, the dragons were maintained by professional dragonologists, including Ron's older brother, Charlie Weasley, during their time in the forest. This is not particularly important, except for the fact that it's about dragons. But, later in the Goblet of Fire, the forest is the location at which a disheveled Bartemius Crouch Sr. stumbles into view. With his emergence from the forest, we are to later learn that who we thought was Professor Mad-Eye Moody was actually Barty Crouch Jr. in disguise. Book 5, The Order of the Phoenix. In the Order of the Phoenix, much of the time Harry, Ron and Hermione spend in the forest is directly linked to a well-intentioned Hagrid. Here, during one of his Care of Magical Creatures classes, we learn more about the mysterious beings known as Thestrals, the horse-like magical creatures who pull the carriages of students from the Hogwarts Express up to the castle. These beings are invisible to most and can only be seen by people who have witnessed death, which becomes important later on in the series as a representation of the trauma that Harry goes through after losing Sirius. The Forbidden Forest is also where we are first introduced to Hagrid's half-brother, the giant named Grawp. Later in the Order of the Phoenix, Hermione successfully manages to lure the nasty Defense Against the Dark Arts professor, Dolores Umbridge, to the forest by pretending that Dumbledore had hidden a powerful weapon there. Although Hermione likely had no real plan, the group fortunately comes across a herd of centaurs, and Umbridge unwisely insults them. She's then carried off, but Harry and Hermione are able to escape, thanks for Grawp's timely intrusion on the chaos. Book 6, The Half-Blood Prince. This is the only installment in the series in which Harry and friends, or foes, do not find themselves in the Forbidden Forest. Book 7, The Deathly Hallows. And, of course, who could forget that the Forbidden Forest is the location where Harry, at long last, comes up against Voldemort, meeting his death and returning from his version of Limbo, all in just a few short scenes. This series of events begins with Voldemort issuing the following ultimatum to Harry from his temporary headquarters in the forest. I shall wait for 1 hour in the Forbidden Forest. If, at the end of that hour, you have not come to me, have not given yourself up, then battle recommences. Finally understanding what he must do, Harry enters the Forbidden Forest and uses the Resurrection Stone to visit one last time with the loved ones he has lost, including his mum, dad, godfather, Sirius, and Remus Lupin. It seems only fitting that a reunion of this sort happens in the dark and mysterious confines of the forest. After gaining strength from their otherworldly visit, Harry drops the stone, leaving it among the darkness as one of the many secrets now kept in the Forbidden Forest. It's mentioned later on that a centaur joining the Battle of Hogwarts steps on it, pressing it into the forest ground, forever burying it in an unmarked area of the woods. Honourable mentions of the Forbidden Forest. Although not nearly as prominent as the scenes just discussed, there are a few other points that revolve around the forest throughout the Harry Potter series that deserve a mention. For starters, there's much talk throughout the series regarding Fred and George Weasley's preoccupation with the Forbidden Forest, although it's never revealed why the twins may have been so interested in the wooded area. If I had to guess, though, I'd wager that they'd seen something of interest on the Marauders map. It would be interesting to know what exactly they were so keen to look for in the forest though, perhaps something to discuss in another video. And let's not forget that Hagrid's hut was also located right on the edge of the forest. Of course, Harry visited Hagrid frequently throughout the series, and always received much value from his visits, emotional and otherwise. But of course, all of this is just a mere glimpse into the entire history of the Forbidden Forest, for our dear Harry only attended Hogwarts for a brief 6 years, as he was trotting the globe in search of Voldemort's Horcruxes during what would have been his 7th year at the magical school. And so, through the chronicles of Harry Potter, we are only given a very slight overview of what has gone on in this forest over the centuries. For example, when did it become known as the Forbidden Forest? Why was a school for children built right alongside it? With all this in mind, there's likely an incredibly rich backstory for this mysterious location. So let's dig into the earlier history of this daunting wood. The early history of the Forbidden Forest. The Forbidden Forest, as it is primarily known amongst the students of Hogwarts, is also referred to by the wider wizarding world as the Dark Forest. As we've already discussed at much length, a portion of the forest is located within the grounds of Hogwarts, along the edges of the property. It is incredibly old, with first known mention of it dating back to as early as the first millennium. In fact, it's believed that the forest was originally a small, simple wood inhabited and cared for by only a herd of lone centaurs. As it was, no one quite knows exactly when it garnered its current reputation for harboring some of the most dark and dangerous magical creatures, or when it grew to such a size as it stands today. It's important to note, however, that the Forbidden Forest is also home to a few more friendly magical beings as well. Being that the forest is so ancient, filled with gnarled beech, oak, pine, sycamore, and yew trees that have lived for centuries, alongside mysterious and sinister-looking black flowers, the forest is also said to hold many secrets, unbeknownst to the larger magical community. Due to the lack of visitors from outside the forest, there are very few paths, except for near the entrances. Even here, those who dare venture inside are met with thorns and large roots, known to make it incredibly difficult to pass through the brush. And yet, we know from characters like Bartemius Crouch Sr., who stumbled out of the Forbidden Forest near the end of the Goblet of Fire, that it was possible to traverse the forest and access the grounds of Hogwarts from the outside world simply by navigating your way through it. That said, I suppose, with all the dark and sinister creatures who live within the forest, it's likely not quite as easy as simply walking on through. Despite the level of difficulty required to make one's way through the dark forest, it does seem like a giant oversight by those who founded Hogwarts to have not built some form of barrier between the school grounds and the outside world. As it stands, it seems like an incredible flaw in the protection of the school students. But I digress. Due to its proximity to the school grounds, as well as what we know about the location of Hagrid's hut, it likely comes as no surprise that the boundary of the Forbidden Forest was the home of many Hogwarts groundskeepers, including and prior to Rubeus Hagrid. The presumption here is that each groundskeeper was charged with keeping tabs on the forest, and tending to any known altercations or other important matters that may have arisen within it. The first documented event within the Forbidden Forest that we know of occurred in the late 1970s, when someone, presumably a student of Hogwarts, disturbed what was known as the Forest Vault. This vault was one of 5 legendary cursed vaults within the school, and upon its disturbance, it unleashed a terrible sleepwalking curse upon the pupils of Hogwarts, which led to many students venturing into the Forbidden Forest as they slept. Tragically, this sleepwalking epidemic resulted in multiple deaths and many injuries. At this time, a Hogwarts student named Jacob attempted to break the curse with the help of a centaur who went by the name of Torvus. Unfortunately, Torvus refused to hand over what Jacob required to break the curse, as what the young wizard needed was a precious heirloom to the centaur, a jewel-adorned arrowhead. This led to young Jacob stealing the heirloom, never to return it to the centaur or forest, as he was expelled before he was able to do so. There's also knowledge of a former Hogwarts professor who taught care of magical creatures, Sylvanus Kettleburn, spending a significant amount of time within the forest. Tragically, he was the one responsible for sharing insight into how one could enter the Forbidden Forest undetected by Broom with a particularly troubled young witch, Patricia Rakepick. It's said that this information led to Patricia having unauthorized access to the forest, which ultimately contributed to her ability to murder a fellow student, Rowan Carner, within the wooded setting. Sadly, this is just one of the many tragic ends that other unnamed Hogwarts students met within the Forbidden Forest, as it is common knowledge that more than a few pupils disappeared into the forest over the years, never to be seen again. In today's video, we're going to be traveling beyond the confines of the UK and taking a look at the global wizarding community. In the Harry Potter books and films, we're more or less confined to a couple of places within the UK, and that was our primary introduction to the wizarding world. However, when the Fantastic Beasts films came out, the wizarding world as we know it began expanding, showing us new countries and magical places. In fact, much of the Fantastic Beasts films so far have taken place in America and France, with the next installment bringing us all over the place. With our ever-growing knowledge of other wizarding countries, I find it particularly interesting how the wizarding culture differs from place to place, and in today's video, I'm going to be honing in on one particular aspect of that culture, the school system. Because you see, Hogwarts, though granted the potentially biased honor of the world's greatest magic school, isn't the only option for witches and wizards around the globe. Today, I want to open your eyes to the rest of them, at least the ones we know about, anyway. As it turns out, there are 11 established wizarding schools in total, at least 11 that are officially registered with the International Confederation of Wizards, the primary governing body. There are others, but they aren't as official or regulated, and we don't know much about those ones. Now, I know what you might be thinking. 11 schools? For the whole world? That's it? Well, Pottermore has a fair explanation for this. Affairs relating to magical schooling are handled by the Educational Office of the International Confederation of Wizards, who can direct people to their nearest school. However, the majority of magical communities choose to homeschool young witches and wizards, which is why there are so few schools in comparison to the number of countries. Alternatively, some witches and wizards might take correspondence courses, which may prove a cheaper option in countries that are too small to have their own school. Okay, so there are 11 official wizarding schools, a few unofficial schools, and a significant population of homeschooled students. Now there's just one thing left to answer. What are these 11 schools? Which countries are they in? How do they differ from Hogwarts? Let's get into it. Castello Brushu. I'm going to kick things off with Castello Brushu, mainly as it's this school that we should expect to see in the upcoming Fantastic Beasts film, The Secrets of Dumbledore. Castello Brushu is a Brazilian wizarding school that's located amid the Amazon rainforest in northern Brazil, and it's home to students from all over South America. The school itself is just as old as Hogwarts, at least according to Pottermore, and was founded 500 years before colonization. The physical structure of the school forms an imposing square of golden rock that resembles a temple, but to Muggle eyes, the school is simply a pile of ruins, protected by enchantments, much like Hogwarts. According to Pottermore, protecting the school grounds are Kaepora, small and furry, mischievous spirit beings that watch over the students and creatures within the forest surrounding the school. Like Hogwarts, the South American student body of Castello Brushu wear a uniform. However, their uniform can be easily identified by the bright green robes outlined with patterns, including yellow lines, red rings, and blue triangles. It has also been expressed that the students of the school are particularly versed in the subjects of herbology and magizoology. We don't know for sure if the school is going to be in the Fantastic Beasts franchise, but we do know that Armando Dippet, the Hogwarts headmaster preceding Dumbledore, meets with the headmistress of Castello Brushu, Benedita Durado, sometime in the 20th century, which could potentially overlap with the film timeline. Koldov Stvoriets. Koldov Stvoriets is the wizarding school of Russia, and one of 11 schools registered with the International Confederation of Wizards. The name comes from the Russian words Koldovstvo, meaning witchcraft, and Tvariets, which means creator. If we overlap the two words, they form a portmanteau, which means the creator of magic. Makes sense for a wizarding school. There isn't much information available out there on the school, and this is because J.K. Rowling, despite including it in the official list of wizarding schools, decided not to publish much additional information on this particular academic institution. However, this lack of information has forced fans to get exceptionally creative, which has resulted in the following fan-published and unofficial school details, including the school being located on a hidden section of Lake Ladoga, a freshwater lake located in northwestern Russia, the school having a protective barrier surrounding it, and the school having a house system, with houses instead being referred to as courts that are represented by coral, pink, turquoise, and amber. The only canon information that we have on the Koldov Stvoriets is that they have their own version of Quidditch, where, instead of flying on brooms, they fly on entire uprooted trees. Durmstrang. Durmstrang, which you've probably heard of before, think Goblet of Fire, bears the darkest reputation of all wizarding schools, and was once home to infamous dark wizard Gellert Grindelwald, before he was expelled for experimenting with twisted magic. Aside from students and staff of the school, no one knows exactly where Durmstrang is, other than that it's located somewhere in the far north of Europe. This is because visitors of the school must comply with having memory charms performed on them in order to erase their knowledge of how they arrived there. According to Pottermore, visitors of the school speak of vast, sprawling grounds with many stunning views, not least of the great, dark, spectral ship that is moored on a mountain lake behind the school, from which students dive in summertime. Durmstrang was originally founded during the Middle Ages by a Bulgarian witch named Nerida Volkanova. She successfully operated the school until her mysterious death. at which point she was succeeded by Harfang Munter, a wizard who established the school's reputation for its emphasis on martial magic. Later in the school's future, Dark Wizard and former Death Eater Igor Karkaroff became headmaster of the school, at which point he promoted a culture of fear and intimidation, further contributing to the school's dark reputation. Upon Karkaroff's assumption of power, many parents withdrew their students from the school. The students of Durmstrang wore fur cloaks, fur hats, and blood-red robes. Ilvermorny. In 2016, J.K. Rowling published a lengthy origin story for Ilvermorny School, North America's School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. If you want to know the whole thing, check out my video in the pinned comment. As for now, I'm just going to be providing a brief summary. Ilvermorny was founded in the early 17th century by Isolde Sayre, an Irish pureblood witch, the only child and daughter of William and Rhianach Sayre, and the wife of James Stewart. Together with her husband, they founded Ilvermorny School and established its 4 houses: Thunderbird, Wampus, Horned Serpent, and Pukwudgie. Ilvermorny can be described as follows. The great North American School of Magic was founded in the 17th century. It stands at the highest peak of Mount Greylock, where it is concealed from non-magic gaze by a variety of powerful enchantments, which sometimes manifest in a wreath of misty cloud. The school started as Isolde and James simply teaching their adopted children in a small cottage, but over the years their operation began to grow, eventually becoming a fully fledged educational institution. Per Pottermore, Ilvermorny's reputation continued to increase over the years, and it eventually became a boarding school, taking in students from across North America. More teachers were hired to meet the demand, and the house was expanded to a castle. By the 19th century, it had gained an international reputation, and by the 1920s, it was considered one of the greatest wizarding schools in the world. The current head teacher of Ilvermorny is Agilbert Fontaine, the direct descendant of one of the 12 original Macusa Auras. Isolde and James both lived to be over 100. They had seen the cottage of Ilvermorny become a granite castle, and they died in the knowledge that their school was now so famous that magical families all over North America were clamoring to educate their children there. They had hired staff, they had built dormitories, they had concealed their school from no magis by clever enchantments. In short, the girl who had dreamed of attending Hogwarts had helped found the North American equivalent. Beauxbatons. Beauxbatons Academy of Magic was founded sometime in the 13th century by an unknown witch or wizard. The school can be found somewhere in the Pyrenees Mountains of southern France, and is home to witches and wizards of many different nationalities. The school itself is said to be stunning in nature, complete with majestic gardens and a magical fountain which is said to possess healing and beautifying properties. Some speculate that part of the school's impressive physical appearance can be attributed to donations from one of its former pupils, Nicolas Flamel, also known as the creator of the Philosopher's Stone. The school's coat of arms isn't so bad to look at either, with 2 golden wands crossed over one another, firing 3 stars. You should already know a little about Beauxbatons, as it's referenced in the Harry Potter books quite a bit, particularly in the Goblet of Fire, where they compete against Hogwarts and Durmstrang in the Triwizard Tournament. We also have a pretty good grasp of the students, as Fleur Delacour ends up being a recurring character. The school uniform for Beauxbatons is comprised of pale blue robes made of fine silk, along with a pale blue hat, and the current headmistress for Beauxbatons is none other than Madame Olympe Maxime, also known as Hagrid's love interest, a half-giant witch who seems to maintain quite a good relationship with the student body. Mahutu Koro. Mahutu Koro is the Japanese school of magic, located on the topmost point of the volcanic island of Manima Iwo Jima. It's unknown when exactly the school was founded, but many speculate that it is one of the oldest wizarding schools, only described as ancient. This ancient Japanese school has the smallest student body of the 11 great wizarding schools and takes students from the age of 7, although they do not board until they are 11. While day students, wizarding children are flown back and forth to their homes every day on the backs of a flock of giant storm petrels. The ornate and exquisite palace of Mahutu Koro is made of mutton fat jade, and stands on the topmost point of the uninhabited, or so Muggles think, volcanic island of Minami Iwo Jima. In my opinion, Mahotukoro has the most interesting dress code of all the schools, as the colours, size of the robes they wear are dynamic in nature. This is described on Pottermore. Students are presented with enchanted robes when they arrive, which grow in size as they do, and which gradually change colour as the learning of their wearer increases, beginning a faint pink colour and becoming, if top grades are achieved in every magical subject, gold. If the robes turn white, this is an indication that the student has betrayed the Japanese Wizard's Code and adopted illegal practices, which in Europe we call dark magic, or broken the International Statute of Secrecy. To turn white is a terrible disgrace, which results in instant expulsion from the school and trial at the Japanese Ministry for Magic. Students of Mahotukoro typically used wands crafted out of cherry wood, and the school itself is known for its impressive academic prowess, as well as its outstanding reputation for Quidditch. Interestingly, even with a small student body, this is the only known school in Asia, which could suggest that some Asian witches and wizards also attend Koldov Stvoriets in Russia. Wagadu. Wagadu is a wizarding school located in what are called the Mountains of the Moon, an ancient term referring to the Rwenzori Mountains of Uganda, found at the source of the Nile River. The school, located in a mountain range, has been described as a stunning edifice carved out of the mountainside, shrouded in mist so that it sometimes appeared simply to float in midair. The exact founding year of the school is unknown. However, we do know that the school has been around for about 1,000 years, making it similar in age to Hogwarts. Despite many other smaller wizarding schools popping up all over Africa over the centuries, it has been expressed that Wagadu is the only one to withstand the test of time, making it the largest wizarding school in Africa, and even the world. Students receive notice that they have gained entrance at Wagadu from dream messengers, sent by the headmaster or headmistress of the day. The dream messenger will appear to the children as they sleep and will leave a token, usually an inscribed stone, which is found in the child's hand on waking. No other school employs this method of pupil selection. The students of Wagadu are said to be particularly versed in the areas of astronomy, alchemy, self-transfiguration, and wandless magic. As the wand was primarily a European invention, witches and wizards of Africa learned to channel their magic without any kind of instrument. Furthermore, it has been expressed that the students of Wagadu are able to become animagi at an exceedingly young age, which is especially impressive if we consider that becoming an animagus is very rare in the UK. Not much is known about the school's uniforms, or whether any kind of house system is used. Hogwarts. Hogwarts, have you heard of it? Was founded at some point during the 10th century. It was built hidden off somewhere in the Scottish Highlands. The exact location is never actually revealed, and this was because the 10th century was a time of hardship for witches and wizards. During this time, every day, witches and wizards were being persecuted by muggles, who were intensely hostile when it came to witnessing sources of magic. In order to further protect the staff, students, and school itself, additional precautions were made in the form of charms, helping to further conceal the school from muggle trespassers. If a muggle were to just happen to stumble upon the school grounds, they would only see ruins and signs warning them to stay away. Hogwarts was founded when 4 10th century witches and wizards got together and decided that they had, in the Sorting Hat's own words, the self-same yearning to make the world's best magic school. These founders were Godric Gryffindor, Rowena Ravenclaw, Salazar Slytherin, and Helga Hufflepuff. Thus, Hogwarts was born. The name Hogwarts actually came from founder Rowena Ravenclaw, who had a dream where a warty hog led her to a cliff by a lake. It's also been speculated that this is how they chose a location for the school as well. After its establishment, like with any institution, a crest was formed for Hogwarts. Emblazoned upon the school crest are the words Draco dormian nanquam titulandus, which roughly translates to "Never tickle a sleeping dragon." After the founders founded the school, they decided that they would each create and head their own house, which would represent a personality trait and skill that they wanted to nurture. And it just so happened that despite being close friends, each founder happened to value very different things, which created quite an interesting and diverse array of students at the school. Gryffindor students embodied bravery and chivalry, Ravenclaw, intelligence and wit, Hufflepuff, loyalty and fair play, and Slytherin, the values of being sly and cunning. And that's it for the named wizarding schools. I know that I said that there were 11 official wizarding schools, and there are, but these are the only ones that we have any information on. According to Pottermore, there is an Australian wizarding school, which we have no information on, and 2 more wizarding schools at undisclosed locations. Maybe we'll get this information in the future. Today, we're going to be discussing Azkaban Prison. This will include discussions surrounding the island that it's on, when the prison was introduced, who created the prison itself, and where the island actually is. Considered by many to be reminiscent of the depths of hell, Azkaban Prison would be the last place that a witch or wizard in the Harry Potter universe would want to end up. In fact, the name Azkaban even backs up this horrific reputation, a sinister name that was created through combining Alcatraz, a famous Muggle island prison, and Abaddon, the Hebrew word for place of destruction or depths of hell. But where did this terrible place come from? Was the island that housed Azkaban Prison always a magnet for dark magic? Before the fortress was built, what was the island like? The truth is, before the dark wizard known as Akrisdis ever set foot on the island, Azkaban was an island just like any other. When we think of the significant dark wizards in wizarding history, Akrisdis isn't necessarily the most well known, but after this video, he might just be the first dark wizard that comes to mind. You see, Akrisdis was a practitioner of the worst kinds of dark arts imaginable. Very little is known about Akrisdis, other than the fact that he was alive during the 15th century, and that he was evil, pure evil. No one even knows his nationality. But what we do know is that Akrisdis was the first dark wizard, or maybe even the first person, to ever step foot on the island that would later support Azkaban's dark fortress. While travelling in the 15th century, Akrisdis stumbled upon the island, which at the time had no infrastructure to speak of. However, it wasn't long before Akrisdis made the island his own little dark arts experiment, placing all sorts of charms in the unclaimed territory. One of the first charms that Akrisdis placed on the island was a concealment charm, preventing anyone other than him from intentionally locating it. For this reason, Azkaban has never appeared on any map, Muggle or magical. All we know is that it's located in the North Sea, a marginal sea of the Atlantic Ocean located between Great Britain, Denmark, Norway, Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium, and France. This was the beginning of the island's turn for the worse. After placing the concealment charms on the island, Akrisdis began his twisted dark arts experiments by luring Muggle sailors to the island. After capturing them, Akrisdis would torture and eventually murder them, using whatever twisted abilities he had in his magical arsenal to ensure maximum suffering. And what did Akrisdis need to conduct these horrific experiments? Why, a fortress, of course. Not long after his experiments began, Akrisdis erected a gigantic, dark fortress, terrifying enough to strike fear into even the most courageous witches and wizards. This continued for many, many years, claiming a vast number of victims. Eventually, after enough torture and murder, Akrisdis had completely lost touch with reality. The dark wizard who was hopping mad before landing on the island had reached an entirely new level of insanity, the product of constant experimentation with dark magic. It was in his state of complete madness that many suspect Akrisdis created the first ever Dementors, the aftermath of all of those tortured sailors. Dementors are among the foulest creatures that walk this earth. They infest the darkest, filthiest places. They glory in decay and despair. They drain peace, hope, and happiness out of the air around them. Even Muggles feel their presence, though they can't see them. Get too near a Dementor, and every good feeling, every happy memory will be sucked out of you. If it can, the Dementor will feed on you long enough to reduce you to something like itself, soulless and evil. You'll be left with nothing but the worst experiences of your life. It wasn't until many, many years later, when Akrisdis finally died, that the concealment charms on the island faded away, finally revealing the island to others. The giant island, which Acrizdis had enlarged, simply appeared out of nowhere, which prompted the Ministry of Magic at the time to investigate. Those who entered to investigate refused afterwards to talk of what they had found inside, but the least frightening part of it was that the place was infested with Dementors. Many in authority thought Azkaban an evil place that was best destroyed. Others were afraid of what might happen to the Dementors infesting the building if they deprived them of their home. The creatures were already strong and impossible to kill. Many feared a horrible revenge if they took away a habitat where they appeared to thrive. The very walls of the building seemed steeped in misery and pain, and the Dementors were determined to cling to it. Experts who had studied buildings built with and around dark magic contended that Azkaban might wreak its own revenge upon anybody attempting to destroy it. The fortress was therefore left abandoned for many years, a home to continually breeding Dementors. As mentioned above, after the initial attempts to survey the island, the decision was made to leave the island alone entirely. This decision was driven mainly out of the fear that anyone attempting to destroy it would be met with the island's revenge. However, shortly after the International Statute of Wizarding Secrecy was introduced in 1689, that all changed. Upon the signature of the International Statute of Secrecy in 1689, wizards went into hiding for good. It was natural, perhaps, that they formed their own small communities within a community. Many small villages and hamlets attracted several magical families, who banded together for mutual support and protection. The Minister for Magic at the time, and the second ever official Minister for Magic, I might add, was Damocles Rowell. Rowell took over from Ulick Gamp and integrated being tough on muggles into his election campaign. However, in later years, Rowell did take things too far, eventually being censored by the International Confederation of Wizards and being forced to step down. Before all of this, though, it occurred to Rowell that the system for imprisoning witches and wizards at that time was no longer going to work, primarily due to concerns surrounding security. You see, before Azkaban became the spot for imprisoning witches and wizards, there were many different locations that someone who broke wizarding law could be locked up. The Ministry of Magic felt that the small wizarding prisons that existed up and down the country in various towns and villages posed a security risk, because attempts by incarcerated witches and wizards to break out often led to undesirable bangs, smells, and light shows. A purpose-built prison, located on some remote Hebridean island, was preferred, and plans had been drawn up when Damocles Rowell became Minister for Magic. The International Statute of Secrecy was introduced in 1689, and Rowell didn't take over until 1718. This meant that for nearly 2 decades prior to Rowell taking over, the wizarding prison issue had been on their radar. However, Rowell didn't agree with the existing plans to create a new, purpose-built prison. Instead, he pushed and pushed to utilize the existing infrastructure at Azkaban. Rowell was an authoritarian who'd risen to power on an anti-Muggle agenda, capitalizing on the anger felt by much of the wizarding community at being forced to go underground. Sadistic by nature, Rowell scrapped the plans for the new prison at once and insisted on using Azkaban. He claimed that the Dementors living there were an advantage. They could be harnessed as guards, saving the ministry time, trouble, and expense. In spite of opposition from many wizards, among them experts on both Dementors and buildings with Azkaban's kind of dark history, Rowell carried out his plan, and soon a steady trickle of prisoners had been placed there. None ever emerged. If they were not mad and dangerous before being placed in Azkaban, they swiftly became so. Rowell continued in his role for a number of years before being ousted, and was eventually succeeded by the third ever Minister for Magic, Perseus Parkinson, who shared similarly hateful views on Muggles, even going as far as to try and ban witches and wizards from marrying Muggles. Rowell was succeeded by Perseus Parkinson, who was likewise pro-Azkaban. By the time that Eldritch Diggory took over as Minister for Magic, the prison had been operating for 15 years. There had been no breakouts and no breaches of security. The new prison seemed to be working well. It was only when Diggory went to visit that he realized exactly what conditions inside were like. Prisoners were mostly insane, and a graveyard had been established to accommodate those that died of despair. By the time Eldritch Diggory, the only minister who may have actually opposed the use of Azkaban, took over, it was too late, as Azkaban had proven itself a competent holding facility. However, he did still question the use of Dementors as prison guards, launching a committee to look into things further. Back in London, Diggory established a committee to explore alternatives to Azkaban, or at least to remove the Dementors as guards. Experts explained to him that the only reason the Dementors were mostly confined to the island was that they were being provided with a constant supply of souls on which to feed. If deprived of prisoners, they were likely to abandon the prison and head for the mainland. This advice notwithstanding, Diggory had been so horrified by what he had seen inside Azkaban that he pressed the committee to find alternatives. Before they could reach any decision, however, Diggory caught dragonpox and died. Diggory tried his best during his years as minister to find a replacement for the Dementors that inhabited Azkaban, but due to his untimely death at the hands of dragonpox, this plan never came to fruition. After Diggory, no Minister for Magic questioned the activities of Azkaban for 265 years, with minister after minister choosing to turn a blind eye to the inhumane conditions inside of the fortress. As awful as the fortress was, it was effective as a prison, and its existence meant that the terrifying Dementors inhabiting the island were accounted for. It wasn't until Kingsley Shacklebolt took over in 1998 that things were revisited, with Shacklebolt purging the prison of Dementors. To this day, Azkaban Prison is still used by the Ministry of Magic, but it's a lot different than it used to be. Gone are the days of horrifying Dementors patrolling the fortress. Instead, the Ministry of Magic utilizes auras as guards, who are regularly rotated from the mainland. While it's certainly no island paradise, the walls of Azkaban are a touch less dismal than they used to be. Where before a sentence in Azkaban could rob you of your humanity, the new Azkaban just might offer the right witch or wizard a chance at rehabilitation. Today we'll be discussing the history of the infamous wizarding shop known as Borgin and Burkes. Established in 1863 by two wizards, a Mr. Borgin, first name unknown, and a Mr. Caractacus Burke, Borgin and Burkes has always had a rather notorious reputation. The shop is located at 13B Nocturn Alley, a street said to be quite dangerous, which can be found just off London's main wizarding road of Diagon Alley. The dangers present along Nocturn Alley come from both the nefarious businesses that operate down the street, in addition to the questionable witches and wizards who frequent these establishments. In fact, the street has such a bad reputation that Molly Weasley forbade her children, specifically Fred and George, from venturing down the alley at all. As for Borgin and Burkes itself, the shop has often been described, rather benignly, as an antique shop. However, what's inside is much more dangerous and potentially deadly than any antique shop us muggles would be familiar with. I would even wager that this was the exact feeling that Harry Potter had the first time he, accidentally, visited Borgin and Burkes by way of flue powder, as described in the following passage from the Chamber of Secrets. All he could tell was that he was standing in the stone fireplace of what looked like a large, dimly lit wizard shop, but nothing in here was ever likely to be on a Hogwarts school list. A glass case nearby held a withered hand on a cushion, a blood-stained pack of cards, and a staring glass eye. Evil-looking masks stared down from the walls, an assortment of human bones lay upon the counter, and rusty, spiked instruments hung from the ceiling. Even worse, the dark, narrow street Harry could see through the dusty shop window was definitely not Diagon Alley. In addition to some of these sinister items that Harry noticed in the shop, Borgin and Burkes is rumoured to have carried a variety of other dark and deadly things over the years, including the Hand of Glory, the cursed opal necklace that nearly killed Katie Bell in 1996, and one of the matching vanishing cabinets, whose mate could once be found in Hogwarts' Room of Requirement. While it's logical to speculate that some of the shop's magical wares could be rather affordable, such as the blood-stained pack of cards that Harry saw, the vast majority of the items sold in Borgin and Burkes are known to be rather expensive. For example, the opal necklace was said to be worth 1,500 galleons, likely due to both its incredible beauty and deadly curse. This is showcased in Harry's description of Draco Malfoy admiring the necklace during that first fateful visit Harry had to the shop in 1992. He paused to examine a long coil of hangman's rope and to read, smirking, the card propped on a magnificent necklace of opals. Caution, do not touch. Cursed. Has claimed the lives of 19 Muggle owners to date. But whether or not the prices of the dark artifacts and antiques found within Borgin and Burkes are justified or not, it's widely known that both owners of the shop have always been incredibly greedy people. As the founders and proprietors of the store since its opening in the mid-19th century, both wizards have proven to be rather selfish and money-grubbing individuals indeed, with their morals mirroring their overall appearances as greasy salesmen. We see this depiction of Mr. Borgin described outright during his interaction with Lucius and Draco Malfoy. "Mr. Malfoy, what a pleasure to see you again," said Mr. Borgin, in a voice as oily as his hair. This, of course, is not confined to their behaviour in the early 90s, as both Mr. Borgin and Mr. Burke have had plenty of history being slimy proprietors. The first notable event supporting this took place in the mid-1920s, when an incredibly pregnant Merripy Gaunt came to the store to sell one of her family heirlooms. Her husband, a Muggle who had left Merripy after she had lifted her enchantment on him, was unwilling to support her, and so, alone and destitute, Merripy visited Borgin and Burkes with a locket that had been in her family for years. As it turned out, this was no ordinary heirloom, and it was actually the golden locket that had once belonged to Salazar Slytherin, one of the 4 founders of Hogwarts. Recognizing that Merripy had little understanding of the locket's value, Mr. Burke bought it from her for only 10 galleons, despite it being rather priceless, as he explains in a pensive memory that Albus Dumbledore had acquired. "Yes, we acquired it in curious circumstances. It was brought in by a young witch just before Christmas, many years ago now. She said she needed the gold badly. Well, that much was obvious. Covered in rags and pretty far along. Going to have a baby, see? She said the locket had been Slytherin's. Well, we hear that sort of story all the time. Oh, this was Merlin's, this was his favourite teapot. But when I looked at it, it had his mark all right, and a few simple spells were enough to tell me the truth. Of course, that made it near enough priceless. She didn't seem to have any idea how much it was worth. Happy to get 10 galleons for it. Best bargain we ever made." Mr. Burke later sold the locket to the witch Hepzibah Smith for a small fortune. Then, in 1945, almost 2 decades later, Burke unknowingly hired Merripy Gaunt's son, Tom Riddle. Tom had recently graduated from Hogwarts and began working at the shop immediately after the school year ended. Of course, Tom was not just any employee. He was the inherently evil young man who went on to become one of the darkest wizards of all time, Lord Voldemort. So Voldemort went off to Borgin and Burkes, and all the staff who had admired him said what a waste it was, a brilliant young wizard like that, working in a shop. However, Voldemort was no mere assistant. Polite and handsome and clever, he was soon given particular jobs of the type that only exist in a place like Borgin and Burkes, which specializes, as you know, Harry, in objects with unusual and powerful properties. Voldemort was sent to persuade people to part with their treasures for sale by the partners, and he was, by all accounts, unusually gifted at doing this. After working for Borgin and Burkes for over a decade, Tom was sent to visit Hepzibah Smith, the same witch who had purchased his mother's locket all those years ago. The visit resulted in Tom stealing the locket and killing Miss Smith, a murder which ended up being just one of many that Voldemort would commit in the pursuit of magical items he deemed worthy of becoming his Horcruxes. This act resulted in Tom disappearing from magical society and effectively ended his employment at Borgin and Burkes. Throughout the decades, Borgin and Burkes has been used as a place to unload illegal magical items that could be confiscated by the British Ministry of Magic, should they find them. In fact, it is for this very reason that Lucius Malfoy was visiting the shop in 1992, when Harry accidentally found himself there. Over the years, Draco Malfoy also became a loyal patron of the shop, coming to Borgin and Burkes alongside his father on many occasions, before eventually seeking services for his own purposes. In 1996, for example, Draco came to Mr. Borgin for help in repairing one of the twin vanishing cabinets. It was also during the same year that Draco purchased the Hand of Glory, as well as the cursed opal necklace from the shop. One final noteworthy historical event that Borgin and Burkes was involved in took place in 1997, when a group of Death Eaters invaded Hogwarts Castle, led by Draco Malfoy. The handful of dark witches and wizards who were able to get onto school property undetected did so by entering the one vanishing cabinet located in Borgin and Burkes and exiting the one that was in Hogwarts. This event led to the infamous death of one of the Wizarding World's most celebrated modern-day wizards, Albus Dumbledore. Today, we'll be discussing the history of the all-wizarding village of Hogsmeade. Located in the Scottish Highlands near the unplottable castle of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, Hogsmeade Village is presumed to have been founded around the same time as the neighbouring school, putting its establishment around the 10th or 11th century. As such, Hogsmeade Village has been in existence for centuries, and was originally founded by a medieval English wizard who went by the name Hengist of Woodcroft. Many have noted that Hogsmeade is the only all-wizarding village in the entirety of Britain, which legend has it was done intentionally by Hengist of Woodcroft in an effort to help protect witches and wizards from Muggle persecution, which was of course incredibly common during the Middle Ages. Since then, due to the fact that Hogsmeade is populated entirely by residents who are part of wizarding society, the village has been made a target by other magical species who have found themselves in conflict with witches and wizards over the centuries. For example, the village has been attacked multiple times by goblin kind, with the first instance being in 1612, when a goblin rebellion was carried out in and around Hogsmeade. A goblin revolt once again brought unrest to the village in 1890, when the goblin Ranrock and his followers unleashed a troll upon the village during his rebellion campaign of the late 1800s. Fortunately, since then, Hogsmeade has experienced a period of somewhat uninterrupted peace. Of course, there have been times throughout the years in which the entire wizarding world has experienced violence and unrest, which has extended to the village of Hogsmeade, although none of these later conflicts have had to do with the fact that Hogsmeade is an all-wizarding settlement. Most notably, since the 1800s, though, Hogsmeade has been affected by the uprisings of the two most infamous modern-day dark wizards, Gellert Grindelwald and Lord Voldemort. In combination, these two wizards have been responsible for the vast majority of violence witnessed in Hogsmeade throughout the 20th century. This, of course, includes the horrific Battle of Hogwarts on May 2nd, 1998, in which residents of the village came to the aid of those fighting Voldemort and his Death Eaters on the grounds of Hogwarts. During more peaceful times, the village is quite the sight to behold. Whether you travel there by foot, secret passage, more on that in just a moment, or by train, Hogsmeade Village is incredibly quaint in appearance and a rather lovely place to visit. As with many villages of this size in the Scottish Highlands, this is especially true around the holidays, as noted by Harry the first time he visits Hogsmeade, close to Christmas time in 1993. Hogsmeade looked like a Christmas card. The little thatched cottages and shops were all covered in a layer of crisp snow. There were holly wreaths on the doors, and strings of enchanted candles hanging in the trees. Although it has evolved since it was first established during medieval times, with modern additions to the village, such as a train station, Hogsmeade has presumably remained the same in a number of ways. For example, it seems likely that it has always had a main road running through it, as most settlements do. Today, this road is known as High Street, and is the location of the majority of Hogsmeade's most popular establishments, like the sweet shop Honeydukes. High Street is of course the primary point of attraction for visitors who come to the village, including Hogwarts students, except for maybe those who are interested in walking over to see the Shrieking Shack, the haunted house which sits abandoned on the outskirts of Hogsmeade. For visitors who prefer less frightening attractions, however, the village also offers around 24 shops that sell everything from magical items of just about every kind to butterbeer. There's even an owl post to send your mail. With so many exciting places to visit within the village, it's no wonder that Hogwarts students enjoy spending their time there. Not to mention, it's just a short walk away from the castle and its grounds. It's likely due to this enthusiasm that Hogwarts passed the 1714 Edict, which proclaimed that students could regularly visit the village on certain weekends throughout the school year. And so, since 1714, it has been a tradition for those in their third year or above at Hogwarts to visit the village, but only with a parent or guardian's permission, of course. Fortunately, for those unlucky few who are unable to secure permission from their families, such as Harry Potter, walking isn't the only way to get to Hogsmeade. In fact, there are many number of secret passageways and tunnels that connect the Hogwarts grounds to the village, as Harry is made aware of thanks to Fred and George Weasley, who gift him with the magical Marauders map. This map showed a set of passages he had never entered, and many of them seemed to lead right into Hogsmeade, said Fred, tracing one of them with his finger. There are 7 in all. Now, Filch knows about these 4, he pointed them out, but we're sure we're the only ones who know about these. Don't bother with the one behind the mirror on the 4th floor. We used it until last winter, but it's caved in, completely blocked. And we don't reckon anyone's ever used this one, because the Whomping Willow's planted right over the entrance. But this one here, this one leads right into the cellar of Honeydukes. We've used it loads of times, and as you might have noticed, the entrance is right outside this room, through that one-eyed old crone's hump. Soon after this exchange with the Weasley twins, Harry discovered this particular secret tunnel firsthand. "Descendium," Harry whispered, tapping the stone witch again. At once, the statue's hump opened wide enough to admit a fairly thin person. Harry glanced quickly up and down the corridor, then tucked the map away again, hoisted himself into the hole head first, and pushed himself forwards. He slid a considerable way down what felt like a stone slide, then landed on cold, damp earth. He stood up, looking around. It was pitch dark. He held up his wand, muttered Lumos, and saw that he was in a very narrow, low, earthy passageway. The passage twisted and turned, more like the burrow of a giant rabbit than anything else. Harry hurried along it, stumbling now and then on the uneven floor, holding his wand out in front of him. It took ages. Now, while it was rather wonderful for our dear boy Harry to have learned of these passageways connecting Hogwarts to Hogsmeade, they do bring up a few rather important questions about the village itself. Who built them, and why? If Hogsmeade was established around the same time as the school, it's quite possible that Hengist of Woodcroft worked alongside the anonymous architect of Hogwarts to build these tunnels, although for what purpose is anyone's guess. It's also possible that these 2 wizards worked together only to create 1 or 2 of the 7 secret passageways, as we know that the tunnel connecting the village to the school through the Shrieking Shack and Whomping Willow was created by Albus Dumbledore for the express purpose of providing Remus Lupin a place to safely transform into his werewolf self as a student during full moons. So much for the Shrieking Shack being haunted. Then, of course, there's the passage that leads from Hogwarts' Room of Requirement to the Hogshead Inn in the village. This tunnel may very well have been initially created by a student in need of food who was passing by or already inside the Room of Requirement, meaning that it was the room's magic that opened up the passageway to the inn. It's also possible that several of the tunnels connecting the village to the school were built and used during times of war, as seen with this last passageway during the Battle of Hogwarts. For it was during this time that the tunnel was used to ferry witches and wizards onto the school's grounds, undetected, to fight against Voldemort, as well as to evacuate younger students from the school during the battle.
Today, we're going to be discussing wizarding prisons. A few months back, I broke down all of the known schools in the international wizarding community, and today, similar to that, I'm going to be pivoting to international prisons. Everyone knows Azkaban, but do you know the other 7? Let's dive into it. Number 1. Nurmengard. Known by some as the home base for Grindelwald's operations during his tyrannical regime spanning the early 1900s, and known by others as the castle that ended up keeping Grindelwald as its prisoner, Nurmengard is, after Azkaban, probably the most famous wizarding prison in Harry Potter. Located in the Austrian Alps, Grindelwald built Nurmengard to 1. Act as his base of operations for him and his followers, and 2. Hold his enemies and prisoners of war. Sitting on the edge of a mountain, the stone fortress had massive, tall walls and boasted an impressive tower with a cone-shaped top, presumably serving as a kind of watchtower. The grounds of Nurmengard were nothing to scoff at either, featuring a gated courtyard from which you could sit and look at the beautiful scenery all around. That is, if you weren't distracted by the prison bars on either side of the courtyard that were used to keep the less powerful prisoners captive. Inside is where the prisoners that he felt were a real threat were kept. Inside of the prison was just as spectacular as the mountains around it, at least while Grindelwald was still in power. It was outfitted with tall windows, velvet carpets and long corridors, the perfect prison for a bougie villain like Grindelwald. And if at first it wasn't completely obvious that this was Grindelwald's fortress, The massive "For the Greater Good" slogan carved over the prison's entrance would be a good reminder. Ironically, Grindelwald ended up being imprisoned in Ermengarde himself, the primary reason being that Grindelwald had ties to Austria. That, and the fact that the wizarding authorities thought it would be entertaining to imprison him inside the walls that he built. If Ermengarde didn't exist, then I'm almost certain that he would have ended up in Azkaban. Years later, it was reported that Ermengarde had deteriorated significantly. It no longer had the upkeep of Grindelwald's acolytes, and it simply served as a prison, which it grew to look like more and more as the years passed. Eventually, Ermengarde was nothing more than a giant towering building made of black rock that can only be described as grim and ominous. 2. Azkaban. Azkaban was built in the 15th century and began being used as a detention facility in the year 1718, housing some of the most sinister witches and wizards to have ever disgraced the wizarding world. The name Azkaban is a mixture of the word Alcatraz, which refers to a famous Muggle island prison, and Abaddon, which is a Hebrew word that means place of destruction. Sounds wonderful, doesn't it? At one point in time, before the fortress was built, Azkaban was just an island. But when its first inhabitant, Echrisdis, found the island, he decided to transform it into his own little dark arts experiment. Echrisdis was a dark wizard that practiced the worst forms of dark magic, and he was known to lure sailors to the island, then torture them. Before he got there, he was crazy, but after spending a considerable amount of time there, he went completely bonkers. While Echrisdis lived there, he placed concealment charms on the island so that no one would be able to find it, and after he died, these concealment charms were finally lifted. This is when the British Ministry of Magic first discovered the island. The investigative team from the ministry who first went to Azkaban refused to discuss their findings, other than the fact that the island was infested with dementors. Over the course of its history, Azkaban has been the home to many witches and wizards, including Percival Dumbledore, Bartemius Crouch Jr., various Lestrangers, and various Gaunts, just to name a few. Though it was under much scrutiny initially, when the ministry recognized that they could utilize the island to imprison evildoers, they capitalized on this, and began sentencing people to Azkaban. The Ministry of Magic felt that the smaller, existing wizarding prisons that were scattered across the country posed a considerable security risk and put citizens in danger. Azkaban serves as the ultimate prison due to its remote location and the sea of dementors that make sure the prisoners are in check. Escaping from Azkaban before your sentence is over is punishable by a fate worse than death, a dementor's kiss. The island itself is located in the North Sea, but the island is said to have never appeared on any map, Muggle or magical. It's suspected that the island was either created or enlarged via magical means. I'm thinking that Echrisdis was probably responsible for that. The North Sea is a marginal sea of the Atlantic Ocean located between Great Britain, Denmark, Norway, Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium, and France. If you're going to get locked up, try your absolute best to avoid Azkaban. 3. Erkstag. First witnessed by fans in the new Secrets of Dumbledore film, the Erkstag was a wizarding prison located in Berlin, Germany that was used by the German Ministry of Magic. The Erkstag could be accessed via an underground tunnel system, and many believe that the prison had been publicly abandoned. However, as it turns out, and as we witnessed in the Secrets of Dumbledore, the German ministry was still secretly holding people at the facility by 1932. At the entrance to the prison, there was a prison guard, a warder, who would confiscate each prisoner's personal belongings upon their arrival. The prison itself, which had a circular shape and spiraled downwards, was dark, scary, and certainly not the sort of place you'd want to end up, particularly as your chances of getting out, at least from the way the film portrayed it, were likely quite slim. From what appeared to be near the bottom of the endless spiraling prison structure was a giant manticore that would devour prisoners as soon as their lanterns went out. Dumbledore once referred to Erkstag as the German ministry's bed and breakfast. 4. Makusa Prison. Makusa, aka the Magical Congress of the United States of America, was essentially the American Ministry of Magic, and just like the German Ministry of Magic, MACUSA too had their own prison directly linked with their organization. The MACUSA headquarters was located in the Woolworth Building in downtown New York City, and the prison cells were located in the basement. It's entirely unclear how long these prison cells have existed, but provided that MACUSA was founded in 1693, I'd wager it's been a long time. Yes, the Woolworth Building was completed in 1913, but provided that the prison cells were located in the basement of the building, it's entirely possible that they were there before the building had even been built, hiding underground. Reportedly, the main cell room held hundreds of cage-like cells stacked on top of each other, sort of like what you'd expect to see at a dog pound. And in the middle of the main room, there was a large staircase with iron bars on both sides that led up to the rooftop of the Woolworth Building. Though the building was clean and relatively well kept, it certainly didn't mean that prisoners there had a good experience. In fact, prisoners were kept in strangely dark rooms devoid of windows, accessible only through one ominous-looking iron door with a tiny sliding window, big enough only to fit your eyes. 5. Dark Tower, Hogwarts. A prison at Hogwarts? Yes, you heard me right. Just near the Transfiguration Courtyard at Hogwarts, you may recall a tall, narrow tower. This dark-looking tower, aptly named the Dark Tower, was in fact used as a prison at Hogwarts. However, provided that this prison was at a school for children, and given that there were only a few cells, I'd probably call it more of a holding facility. The tower itself was 7 stories tall, and sported 4 gargoyles on each corner of the tower, directing water away from it when it rained. It has also been reported that the prison cells were not outfitted with any kind of incantations, making it a lot less secure than other wizarding prisons we know. While in the present day there may not be much need for a prison cell at Hogwarts, we do have to remember that back in the day, before Azkaban, prisons were scattered all across the country. Having a holding cell, or at least something at Hogwarts, a massive hub for witches and wizards, probably made a lot of sense. In the film version of The Prisoner of Azkaban, Sirius Black is held prisoner in this tower. However, in the books, he's kept in Phileas Flitwick's office over in the West Tower. 6. New York Witches Penitentiary. The New York Witches Penitentiary, first mentioned on a poster in Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, was a women's-only wizarding prison located in the state of New York. Past prisoners include Madame Miraforum, Eleanor Shanks, and Matildas Heisenberg. All of these women were highly dangerous criminals at large, with crimes ranging from no-match murder to atrocities against the wizarding community. I feel like Bellatrix would have fit right in here. And that pretty much concludes the list of the main prisons. The only other 2 wizarding prisons, if you could call them that I know of, are the abandoned substation, which was used as a holding facility for snatchers to hold muggleborns, and the abandoned nuclear power plant, which was used to imprison enemies of the Death Eater-controlled Ministry of Magic. These facilities appeared in the Harry Potter games and can be seen in the background of some of the Harry Potter film promotional posters. Today, we'll be discussing the history of one of the most famous wizarding bars in the entire world, the Leaky Cauldron. Located at number 1 Diagon Alley within the wizarding world, and accidentally built into the development of Charing Cross Road within Muggle society, the Leaky Cauldron is notably the oldest pub in all of London. The bar and adjoining inn was built sometime in the early 1500s by a witch named Daisy Doddridge. Doddridge, who of course became the Leaky Cauldron's first landowner, had the bar constructed at the same time as many of the other shops that now run the length of the wizarding street, Diagon Alley. It's said that since that time, not much has changed, and that the Leaky Cauldron has always been somewhat of an unassuming place, simply meant to offer a comfortable and welcoming establishment to those interested in grabbing a pint or looking for a room to stay in. The Leaky Cauldron is made up of a ground floor as well as a small upper level. On the ground level there is the bar, as well as a staircase that leads up to a few bedrooms for travellers looking to spend the night. There are also 2 main entryways into the bar, one from Charing Cross Road in the front, and one out back from Diagon Alley.
As an 11-year-old, Harry's first impression of the interior of the Leaky Cauldron is that, for a famous place, it was very dark and shabby. However, a couple of years later, when he's made to stay at the Leaky Cauldron's Inn before the start of the school year, he notes the following about the furniture and decor, which is arguably a much more favourable point of view. Harry followed Tom up a handsome wooden staircase to a door with a brass number 11 on it, which Tom unlocked and opened for him. Inside was a very comfortable-looking bed, some highly polished oak furniture, a cheerfully crackling fire. While it's likely that Harry's general perception of the Leaky Cauldron evolved over the years with his growing understanding of the wizarding world and this particular establishment's place within magical society, his description also suggests that the Leaky Cauldron had clearly been cared for over the centuries by the various landowners that it had been passed down through. This is further supported by the fact that many witches and wizards claim that it has changed shockingly little since its construction in the 16th century. That said, even though the appearance of the place may not have changed much, it's important to note that its patrons certainly have. For well before Harry had ever stepped foot in the pub, the Leaky Cauldron used to be an establishment that welcomed people of all kinds. In fact, for nearly 200 years after it had been built in the early 1500s, prior to the International Statute of Secrecy, just about anyone could visit the pub. Witches, wizards, squibs, and muggles were all known to visit the Leaky Cauldron for their drinking needs. However, with the inauguration of the Statute of Secrecy in 1692, that all changed, and by the time Harry visited the Leaky Cauldron for the first time, it was very much a Wizarding World only kind of place. Due to the new legislation in the 1690s, which was enacted worldwide, many magical establishments were made to simply disappear from Muggle society. But the Leaky Cauldron had become somewhat of an institution, and the idea that it had to go was not met well by the public. It was therefore given an exception to the Statute of Secrecy by the British Minister for Magic at the time, Ulick Gamp, and was allowed to maintain its operations under certain conditions, the most important of which was that it stayed hidden from any Muggle who might pass by. And so, with powerful concealment charms and spells, the Leaky Cauldron became almost entirely imperceptible to Muggles, which enabled the Leaky Cauldron to stay undisturbed in its central London location. As it were, Minister Gamp's actions in allowing the pub to remain operational was so appreciated by the landowner that it resulted in the creation of a brand of beer known as Gamp's Old Gregarious, which the Leaky Cauldron still serves to this day. While a rather touching gesture, rumour has it that the beer is quite unpalatable, which is why there is a 100 galleon reward for any patron willing to finish an entire pint of the stuff, a feat no one has ever done. In any case, to the vast majority of passerbys, the Leaky Cauldron just simply doesn't exist. Harry describes the magic of the concealment spells at work when he visits the pub alongside Hagrid for the first time, as they make their way inside the Leaky Cauldron on their way to Diagon Alley. "This is it," said Hagrid, coming to a halt. "The Leaky Cauldron. It's a famous place." It was a tiny, grubby-looking pub. If Hagrid hadn't pointed it out, Harry wouldn't have noticed it was there. The people hurrying by didn't glance at it. Their eyes slid from the big bookshop on one side, the record shop on the other, as if they couldn't see the Leaky Cauldron at all. In fact, Harry had the most peculiar feeling that only he and Hagrid could see it. Sadly, not all magical establishments were as lucky as the Leaky Cauldron, and the remainder of shops located on Diagon Alley were much more heavily impacted by the Statute of Secrecy. All along the alley, stores selling items like wands, Hogwarts robes, and magical creatures became invisible to the outside world in an effort to protect them from being discovered. And so, as one of the few places which were allowed to stay accessible to the Muggle world within London, the Leaky Cauldron became the point of entry for witches and wizards looking to access Diagon Alley. The exact entryway to the magical street is located in the Leaky Cauldron's backyard, a plain brick wall which lines a small courtyard out the bar's back door. To access the alley beyond the wall, a person needs to know exactly which bricks to tap to turn them into an archway. Again, we learn how this works from Harry's explanation of Hagrid opening up the entryway the first time he visits Diagon Alley. Hagrid led them through the bar and out into a small, walled courtyard, where there was nothing but a dustbin and a few weeds. Hagrid, meanwhile, was counting bricks in the wall above the dustbin. 3 up, 2 across, he muttered. "Right, stand back, Harry. He tapped the wall 3 times with the point of his umbrella. The brick he had touched quivered. It wriggled in the middle. A small hole appeared. It grew wider and wider. A second later, they were facing an archway large enough even for Hagrid. An archway onto a cobbled street, which twisted and turned out of sight. "Welcome," said Hagrid, "to Diagon Alley." It's presumed that for the next couple hundred years after the establishment of the Statute of Secrecy, the Leaky Cauldron operated without much issue. However, by the late 1800s, the area of central London in which it resided was being built up by the local Muggle community. It was at this time that the modern-day Charing Cross Road was put into development, which had the potential to demolish not only the pub, but the access it granted the wizarding world to Diagon Alley. It's said that even the British Minister for Magic of the day, Varys Spavin, had admitted defeat and gave a rather lengthy speech, 7 hours to be exact, in the Wizengamot as to why the Muggle construction of Charing Cross Road would destroy the pub. Fortunately for the magical community of today, the local witches and wizards at the time came together to perform an abundance of memory charms on the Muggle town planners in order to revise the plans for Charing Cross Road to accommodate the Leaky Cauldron. This resulted in the pub being left alone and is the very reason that it still stands today. Today, we'll be discussing the history of the Black Lake, as well as one of its most mysterious and infamous inhabitants, the giant squid. The Black Lake, otherwise known as the Great Lake, is a large body of fresh water that sits landlocked upon the grounds of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, just south of the school's castle. Its waters can be seen directly from the castle, as it is located below the school itself. For those of you who are familiar with the other wilderness areas that surround Hogwarts Castle, such as the Forbidden Forest, it is rather well known that the school's grounds offer a home to many magical beasts and creatures. Acting as more than just the castle's plumbing receptacle, the Black Lake is no exception, granting shelter to a large number of inhabitants, including a village of merpeople, an abundance of vicious little Grindylows, and, of course, the legendary giant squid. Measuring about 1/2 mile in diameter, it's presumed that the Black Lake has always been there, at least since the founding of Hogwarts in the 10th century by Godric Gryffindor, Rowena Ravenclaw, Helga Hufflepuff, and Salazar Slytherin. However, it's entirely possible that the Black Lake was actually created by one or more of these 4 founding witches and wizards, as I imagine that alongside the construction of the castle, the founders would have also taken the grounds into serious consideration. This seems especially logical when one considers just how little the landscape of the Black Lake has changed over the centuries, for natural landmarks such as this typically ebb and flow with the ever-changing landscape and weather patterns of its environment, but not the Black Lake, and with such little change, it seems quite likely that the founders may have had a hand in leveraging their magical talents and abilities in order to create the expansive freshwater lake. Of course, there's Helga Hufflepuff's expertise in herbology and earth magic, which very well could have played a pivotal role in crafting the lake itself. Then there's the fact that the Black Lake has become a safe haven for so many magical creatures. Perhaps the founders wished to create an environment within nature in which beasts who are magical could live peacefully alongside the wizarding school of Hogwarts, as well as close to the magical settlement of Hogsmeade, providing underwater creatures like Grindylows and Selkies a place to live away from the Muggle world would have prevented them from being spotted, or possibly even hunted, by people. Beyond its allure of hosting magical creatures, the Black Lake also seems to hold significant importance within the wizarding world. It's believed that certain historical records indicate that ancient wizards performed rituals and ceremonies near its shores, harnessing the lake's magical properties. Some believe that these rituals were tied to divination, potion making, and even complex spells that drew upon the lake's unique energies. By the time Harry Potter attended Hogwarts, the Black Lake had become integral to some of the school's most well-known traditions, the first of which pertained to the arrival of new students. Upon the arrival of the Hogwarts Express each year, the first years were unloaded at Hogsmeade Station and led to the edge of the Black Lake. Here, a Hogwarts faculty member would load 4 students at a time into the small boats to journey across the lake towards the school's castle. This was how the upper-class students were able to arrive at the castle first, by Thestral, and get settled into the Great Hall before the first years arrived to be sorted into their houses. The Black Lake then played a part in the graduating traditions of these 7th-year students, who would leave Hogwarts for the last time by sailing back across the waters at the end of their final year. But perhaps the most intriguing aspect of the lake is yet to come. Sometime over the course of the past 800 years, a giant squid had also come to call the Black Lake its home. Despite its immense size, little is known about this enormous water creature, leaving us to ponder its origins, magical abilities, and, to a greater extent, its role within the wizarding world. Which leads us to the question of, was the squid always in the lake? Was it put there by the founders when they created the lake itself? If this was the case, presumably the squid would have been viewed by the founders as a protector of the Black Lake, and by extension, Hogwarts. This would suggest that the squid is a sort of lake guardian, potentially protecting its magical secrets, which I suppose is a valid theory. But what if the Hogwarts founders weren't the ones responsible for bringing, creating, or conjuring the giant squid to the Black Lake? How did it get there, and how long has it been there? While there aren't any confirmed first sightings of the mysterious giant squid, we do know that it has called the depths of the Black Lake its home since as early as the 1990s. But if the giant squid arrived in the Great Lake between the 1100s and the 1900s, how did it get there? Well, you may recall the arrival of the students from Durmstrang Institute during the Triwizard Tournament in 1994. A boat carrying the Durmstrang students appeared upon the Black Lake from the depths of its waters. But the Institute is located in Northern Europe, on the continent thousands of miles away from the waters of the Great Lake in the Scottish Highlands. Not only that, but the lake is, well, a lake, with no known access points to other bodies of water. Therefore, it stands to reason that within the lake itself is a magical portal or access point that joins the depths of the Black Lake with other bodies of water around the world. This could account for how the giant squid ended up there. Assuming that the giant squid was able to magically teleport itself to the waters of the Black Lake, then we must also consider the abilities of the creature itself. Is it magic, or did it simply stumble upon a portal that whisked it away to the Black Lake? Indeed, there are a few reasons why I believe the giant squid is magical in nature and might possess a high level of sentience, perhaps even a connection to ancient magical energies within the lake. For one, the giant squid has the ability to survive in the fresh water of the Black Lake. In the Muggle world, non-magical squids are only able to survive in salt water. So without magic, the giant squid would not survive living in a freshwater lake like this. It would also appear that the Black Lake's giant squid has demonstrated more intelligence than any giant squid known within the Muggle world. For example, it has purposefully helped push students, like Dennis Creevy, back into his boat after he fell out while crossing the waters at the beginning of the 1994 school year, alongside his fellow first years. The squid has also been known to allow students to tickle its tentacles, as Harry and Ron see Fred, George and Lee Jordan do in passing at the end of one school year, showing that it has the sentience to know that the three boys mean it no harm. They are interacting with it in a way that suggests it understands it's playing with them. This behavior also supports the idea that the giant squid is, at least somewhat, domesticated, and not a dangerous or vicious wild animal, as giant squids in the Muggle world are believed to be. While the majority of these theories remain speculative, they certainly do add to the allure of the giant squid's mystique and align with what we know of the history of the Black Lake. Which brings us to the conclusion of the captivating history of the Black Lake and its enigmatic giant squid. From its mysterious origins alongside the founding of Hogwarts to the legends and theories that surround it, the Black Lake and its giant squid remain true marvels of the wizarding world. Today, we'll be discussing the entire history, as we know it, of number 12 Grimmauld Place. As the ancestral home of the Black family, number 12 Grimmauld Place is portrayed in both the books and the films as a rather decrepit and dreary townhouse, befitting of the dark wizard who called it home for the better part of 2 centuries. Located in a predominantly Muggle neighbourhood in northwest London, near King's Cross Station, the townhouse was originally owned by non-magical folks. While the exact date that number 12 was built is unknown, we can assume that it would have been around the same era as the townhouses in Claremont Square that were used to film the Grimmauld Place scenes in the Harry Potter movies. In fact, the Claremont Square townhouses have been rumoured to be the inspiration behind the Black's family home in the novels. These real-life houses were constructed between 1815 and 1828. So, with this assumption that they represent the inspiration for the fictional number 12 Grimmauld Place, I think it's safe to conclude that the Black's family home was also built during that same Georgian era. As it were, the townhouse was actually rather large, with the front entrance, ground floor, basement, and 4 additional upper floors, and possibly even an attic. The front door was outfitted with a silver knocker shaped like a serpent, and the door itself could only be opened by magic, as it had neither a handle nor a keyhole. Upon entering the house, it became quite obvious that the decor had not been updated in decades. Gas lamps lit the rooms, and hand-painted portraits lined the walls. The carpet was worn and the wallpaper was peeling. Among the portraits was one very prominent portrayal of Sirius Black's mother, Walburga, who had her likeness made into a very large portrait in which she stuck to the wall with a permanent sticking charm. As her portrait self, she was known to yell at passerbyers whom she identified as not pure-blooded witches or wizards. The Black family crest could always be found around the house, which included the motto Toujours pur, meaning always pure in French. On the first floor of the house was a wall completely covered by a tapestry portrayal of the Black family tree. In a rage against her son for not supporting the family values, Walburga burned Sirius's face off the tapestry, presumably after he ran away from home. In terms of the house's history, from what we know, the Muggle family originally purchased the house sometime during the Georgian era. However, one of the Black family members of the time decided that he very much liked the look of number 12 and decided to persuade the owners to move out. Based on the fact that the majority of the House of Black dabbled in dark magic and were known to be incredibly prejudiced towards Muggles, it's unlikely that this persuasion, as it were, was done kindly, especially considering how many members of the Black family were known to go out and perform harmful spells like the Cruciatus Curse on Muggles, just for fun. Imagine what one would do when they actually wanted something from a Muggle. In any case, the Black family gained possession of number 12 Grimmauld Place likely sometime in the mid-1800s. Upon taking ownership of the townhouse, the wizard in question placed a number of spells on the dwelling in order to hide it from Muggle view. In fact, to the majority of the neighborhood, number 12 Grimmauld Place didn't even exist, as all they were able to see was number 11 and number 13, an assumed mistake by the Muggle community. Although not explicitly recorded or stated anywhere, it seems quite possible to trace ownership of number 12 Grimmauld Place back to when the family originally took possession of the house. Due to the fact that Sirius Black, Harry's godfather, refers to Grimmauld Place as his mother's house, it seems rather likely that the house was passed down through his maternal side. She was, after all, a member of the Black family just like her husband Orion, but more on that in just a moment. In any case, Walburga Black was the eldest daughter of Pollux Black and Irma Crabbe. Pollux, who was born in 1912, was the eldest child of Cygnus Black II and Violetta Bulstrode, and Cygnus was born to Phineas Nigellus Black and Ursula Flint in 1889. That said, even if the house was not passed down to Sirius through his mother's side, and it was actually through his father's side, it would hardly matter. As you see, Orion Black's lineage can also be traced back to Phineas Nigellus Black and Ursula Flint, through Orion's father Arcturus Black III, whose father was Sirius Black II, whose parents were, you guessed it, Phineas Nigellus Black and Ursula Flint, meaning that Sirius's parents shared the same great-grandparents. And so, it seems rather likely that Phineas Nigellus Black and Ursula Flint were among the first members of the House of Black to own number 12 Grimmauld Place. Phineas, who lived from 1847 to 1925, and Ursula had 5 children together: Sirius, Phineas, Arcturus, Belvina, and Cygnus. And regardless of whether it was Sirius or Cygnus who eventually took possession of the house after their parents passed, seems rather irrelevant to me, considering that the Black family, in an attempt to keep their precious bloodline pure, were known to often marry their own cousins, as was the case with Sirius's parents, Orion and Walburga. From Sirius or Cygnus, the house would have likely passed on to either Arcturus Black III or Pollux Black,
As Arcturus and Pollux died in 1991 and 1990 respectively, and Orion or Walburga were both already dead by this point, I would assume that the house had already been given to either Orion or Walburga well before the deaths of either of their fathers. What we do know for certain is that by the 1990s, the house belonged to Sirius. Sirius grew up in number 12 Grimmauld Place with his parents and younger brother, Regulus. By the time he was 16 and had spent several years as a Gryffindor at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, he chose to run away, as he did not share the Black family's prejudiced views on muggles, squibs, and those without pure magical bloodlines. His father, Orion, died a few years later in the late 1970s, and his mother continued to live alone in the house, save for Kreacher, the Black family's house elf. As Regulus died trying to destroy one of Lord Voldemort's Horcruxes in 1979, upon their mother's death in 1985, the house became Sirius's, as he was her only surviving descendant. Sirius, who was imprisoned in Azkaban in the early 1980s after he was wrongfully accused of mass murder, did not occupy the home until the mid-1990s. During his absence, Kreacher the house elf was the only being who lived there, tending to the upkeep of the home as best he could, which, as it turned out, was rather poor. In 1995, Sirius offered number 12 Grimmauld Place as the headquarters for the newly reformed Order of the Phoenix. At this time, additional safety measures, such as the Fidelius Charm, were added at the house by Dumbledore and other members of the Order, as described by Sirius in the following passage. It's ideal for headquarters, of course. My father put every security measure known to wizard kind on it when he lived here. It's unplottable, so muggles can never come and call, as if they'd ever have wanted to, and now Dumbledore's added his protection. You'd be hard put to find a safer house anywhere. In 1996, after Sirius died, the house passed down to his godson, who was, of course, Harry Potter. The Order of the Phoenix continued to use the townhouse as its headquarters until Dumbledore's death in 1997, when they evacuated permanently. This was due to the fact that Severus Snape was believed to have murdered Dumbledore and betrayed the Order, and since he knew where number 12 Grimmauld was located, the location was no longer safe for the group to use. At this time, Kreacher once again took up sole residence, kept company only by the myriad of enchantments meant to harm Snape should he return to the townhouse. This, of course, excludes the few weeks when Harry, Ron and Hermione stayed there in 1997, as they attempted to sort out Voldemort's Horcruxes. Unfortunately, their stay was cut short after accidentally revealing its location to a Death Eater. If number 12 Grimmauld Place is still standing, it's assumed that the house remains in Harry Potter's name to this day. Today, we'll be discussing the history of the infamous village, Godric's Hollow. Located in England's West Country, Godric's Hollow is a village that both Muggles and Wizards call home. Although the exact founding date of the village is unknown, being that it is the birthplace of Godric Gryffindor, famous for being one of the founders of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, we can assume that some version of the settlement has been around since at least the late 10th century, as Godric was born in the latter half of the 900s. The village itself has been described as rather quaint, with rows of neighbouring cottages lining its narrow streets. As it stands today, Godric's Hollow also includes a church, shops, a post office, a pub, a graveyard, filled with the tombstones of many famous and legendary witches and wizards, as well as a small village square in the centre of town. All of this and its charm are noted by Harry Potter the first time he sets foot in the village, alongside Hermione Granger in 1997. They were standing hand in hand in a snowy lane under a dark blue sky, in which the night's first stars were already glimmering feebly. Cottages stood on either side of the narrow road, Christmas decorations twinkling in their windows. A short way ahead of them, a glow of golden streetlights indicated the centre of the village. Then the little lane along which they were walking curved to the left, and the heart of the village, a small square, was revealed to them. Strung all around with coloured lights, there was what looked like a war memorial in the middle, partly obscured by a wind-blown Christmas tree. There were several shops, a post office, a pub, and a little church whose stained glass windows were glowing jewel-bright across the square. Before the village became what it is today, however, it is believed that the Peveril brothers resided in Godric's Hollow sometime during the 13th century, due to the fact that all 3 of their tombstones can be found in the village's graveyard. This is of note as Ignotus Cadmus and Antioch Peveril are rumoured to be the 3 brothers whom the Tale of the 3 Brothers is based on. The story is one of several included in the Tales of Beadle and the Bard, a presumed work of fiction told to wizarding children in which 3 brothers each receive a gift from Death himself. These items went on to become known throughout magical society as the fabled Deathly Hallows. While not much is known about the village during the centuries that passed between the 1200s and the 1600s, there was a mass arrival of magical folks to Godric's Hollow in the late 17th century. This is supported by the wizarding text, A History of Magic, which notes that Godric's Hollow was the primary choice of settlement for magical families after the International Statute of Secrecy went into effect in 1689. While there were likely both Muggle and magical residents prior to this time, it is widely understood that Godric's Hollow became much more populated by witches and wizards from that year onward. Magical historian and author of A History of Magic, Batilda Bagshot, also called the village of Godric's Hollow home, living there during both the 1800s and 1900s, before her inevitable murder in 1997 at the hands of Lord Voldemort. Before her death, however, presumably in the early 1890s, the Dumbledores moved into the cottage beside Batilda's, and the 2 families became close friends and neighbours. Sadly, the Dumbledores' move to Godric's Hollow had been prompted by a series of tragic and unfortunate events, starting with an attack on young Ariana Dumbledore by 3 young Muggles, and ending with Albus's father, Percival, being sentenced to live out his remaining days in the wizarding prison of Azkaban. And so it was likely around 1891 or 1892 that Albus, his mother Kendra, brother Aberforth, and sister Ariana settled into their new home in the Hollow. Their move from Mold on the Wold to Godric's Hollow is believed to have been done in an effort to protect young Ariana, who tragically became an obscurial as a result of being attacked at such a young age. Unable to control her own magic, in 1899, a then 14-year-old Ariana accidentally killed her mother in a fit. From there, Godric's Hollow saw the undoing of the Dumbledore family in the span of only 1 year. It was later, in 1899, that Batilda introduced Albus to her great-nephew, Gellert Grindelwald, the man destined to become one of magical society's darkest wizards of all time. The 2 fell in love and made great and terrible plans to take over the wizarding world and subjugate Muggle kind. The village was also the setting for Aberforth to fall in love, who also in 1899 impregnated a witch whose identity remains a mystery. This mystery witch then gave birth to the wizard who would become known as Credence Barebone, another obscurial who would one day stand beside Grindelwald in his endeavours to take control of the International Confederation of Wizards. Finally, in the summer of 1899, Ariana was inadvertently killed during a frivolous duel between Albus, Aberforth, and Gellert. To this day, it's believed that the tombstones of both Kendra and Ariana Dumbledore reside in the graveyard of Godric's Hollow. Then, with little less than a century having gone by, in likely 1979 or 1980, Lily and James Potter moved to Godric's Hollow. Soon after, Lily gave birth to their first and only son, Harry, on July 31st, 1980. It was then just over 1 year later that tragedy struck within their Godric's Hollow home. Believing a prophecy that indicated that Harry Potter would be his ultimate downfall, Lord Voldemort set out to murder the young boy and anyone who stood in his way. Lily and James attempted to protect themselves and their son through the use of the Fidelius charm, only to be betrayed by the person they had entrusted with their secret location. With the knowledge of where their cottage stood, the Dark Lord came to Godric's Hollow and murdered both James and Lily, but was struck down by a form of ancient magic evoked by Lily's loving sacrifice to protect her child. It was here in their home in Godric's Hollow that Harry became the first ever wizard to have survived the killing curse, as described by Harry during his first visit to his childhood home in 1997. He could see it. The Fidelius charm must have died with James and Lily. The hedge had grown wild in the 16 years since Hagrid had taken Harry from the rubble that lay scattered against the waist-high grass. Most of the cottage was still standing, though entirely covered in dark ivy and snow. But the right side of the top floor had been blown apart. That, Harry was sure, was where the curse had backfired. He and Hermione stood at the gate, gazing up at the wreck of what must once have been a cottage, just like those that flanked it.
His touch on the gate seemed to have done it. A sign had risen out of the ground in front of them, up through the tangles of nettles and weeds, like some bizarre, fast-growing flower, and in golden letters upon the wood it said, "On this spot, on the night of 31st of October 1981, Lily and James Potter lost their lives. Their son Harry remains the only wizard ever to have survived the killing curse. This house, invisible to muggles, has been left in its ruined state as a monument to the Potters, and as a reminder of the violence that tore apart their family. The village also has a statue commemorating the tragedy that befell the Potters in Godric's Hollow, similarly hidden from Muggle view by magic. This is described in the following passage from Harry and Hermione's same visit in 1997. Harry, look! She was pointing at the Boar Memorial. As they had passed it, it had transformed. Instead of an obelisk covered in names, there was a statue of 3 people, a man with untidy hair and glasses, a woman with long hair and a kind, pretty face, and a baby boy sitting in his mother's arms. While visiting Godric's Hollow in 1997, Harry and Hermione also discovered that Bathilda Bagshot had been killed by Voldemort, her corpse inhabited by his pet snake, Nagini. Fortunately, before Voldemort arrived or Nagini could harm either one of them, they were able to escape from the village by apparating away. It's not known for certain what has taken place in Godric's Hollow since the late 1990s, magical or otherwise. Today, we're going to be discussing the enigmatic gate of death that is the Veil. Now, if one were to venture through the corridors of the Ministry of Magic for long enough, they'd likely, eventually, find themselves standing before the enigmatic Veil, a haunting manifestation nestled within the death chamber of the Department of Mysteries. And when faced with such an enigmatic wizarding structure, it's hard not to ask questions. What is the Veil? Who created it? And how does the Veil connect to the wizarding world's understanding of life, death, and the beyond? Join me as we apparate through time and space, diving deep into the mysteries of the Veil and shedding light on its presence within wizarding history. What is it? You may remember the heart-stopping moment when, in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, we stepped into the Department of Mysteries, a tangled labyrinth of enchantment and hush-hush operations tucked within the heart of the Ministry of Magic. And who could forget the unspeakables, highly dedicated and secretive witches and wizards that dedicated their lives to working in the department. But perhaps the most chilling revelation to come from our introduction to this department is the Veil. This ancient relic, time-worn and filled with whispered secrets, resides in an ebon-drenched chamber known as the Death Chamber. This stone dais, draped with a crumbling, ripped and strangely memorizing black veil, was like nothing we'd seen before in our journey through the wizarding world. The massive ancient stone archway, which stands in the center of the Death Chamber, acts as a sort of portal between the lands of the living and the dead. It is believed that those who step through the veil, or fall through, become trapped in the world of death. Those who stand close enough and have belief in the afterlife are also able to hear faint whisperings that appear to come from the other side. Some characters in the series, like Harry and Luna, found themselves able to hear the beckoning from the other side of this draped enigma. On the other hand, characters less touched by death or perhaps shielded from it, like Hermione and Ginny, heard nothing but silence. For these reasons, many believe the Veil to be a glimmering threshold guiding departed souls into the next realm, a gateway between the realms of the living and the dead that was created by ancient witchcraft. At least that's one theory. Another theory posits that the Veil was created by the Department of Mysteries as a means to study death and the other side more closely. After all, the Ministry is no stranger to tampering with forces beyond their comprehension, as we've seen with the Time Turners and Dangerous Prophecies. Fortunately, J.K. Rowling herself has weighed in on the enigma of the Veil, confirming its prevalence as the divide between life and death during a July 2007 interview with Bloomsbury. While she didn't go into detail about the Veil's origins, it's clear that the Veil holds great significance in the world of Harry Potter, embodying a powerful connection between the realms of the living and the deceased. Expanding on this further, there's actually a phrase in the English language, beyond the veil, that refers to the mysterious state beyond death. The phrase in turn originates from a Hebrew phrase describing the location of the tabernacle in a Jewish temple. History. The Ministry of Magic is the primary form of government in the magical world, at least in the UK, and was founded in 1707 along with the appointment of the very first Minister for Magic, Ulic Gamp. Like a Muggle government, the Ministry's responsibilities are vast, as they are the primary body that attempts to sustain law and order in the magical world. And like any system of government, in an effort to cover as much ground as possible, the primary governmental body is systematically divided to focus on different sectors of the wizarding world. These sectors, or departments, cover the more common areas like the Department of Magical Law Enforcement and the Department of Magical Transportation. But there are also other departments reserved for less obvious pursuits. This brings us to level 9, the enigmatic Department of Mysteries. The Department of Mysteries is responsible for studying the mysteries of the wizarding world, mysteries associated with love, space, thought, time, death, and other things. Basically anything that is unknown. The divisions of this department are broken up by area of study, and includes the following: the Brain Room, the Hall of Prophecy, the Death Chamber, the Love Chamber, the Space Chamber, and the Time Room. These rooms are accessed via the Room of Doors, a large circular room where everything is black. But well above anything else, the most mysterious thing about the Department of Mysteries is that it actually preceded the existence of the Ministry itself. The Ministry was established in 1707, and the Department of Mysteries had activity as early as 1672, at least activity that's documented. Given that the Veil is located inside of the Department of Mysteries, I'd be willing to bet that the ancient archway also far preceded the existence of the Ministry. In fact, given that this structure predates the Ministry of Magic, I'd like to put forth the idea that the Ministry of Magic and Department of Mysteries were actually constructed around it, marking the chamber off as a place of significance. To expand on this further, let me next take a look at who created it. Now let me first just say that the answer of who created the Veil has never been explicitly mentioned anywhere. However, there is one theory that stands out to me above the rest, and that's that Death himself created the enigmatic archway. The figure of Death plays a significant role in the Harry Potter series, specifically in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, drawing from The Tale of the Three Brothers, which is a story featured in the Tales of Beedle the Bard. Death interacts with the three fabled Peverell brothers and bestows upon them three magical objects. These objects, known as the Deathly Hallows, encompass the Elder Wand, the Resurrection Stone, and the Invisibility Cloak. Each object in the story can be correlated to the desire to control or cheat death. The Elder Wand, which is represented by the vertical line in the symbol, is believed to be the most powerful wand in existence. It signifies the desire for power, and its wielders often meet an untimely end due to the constant pursuit of power over death. The Resurrection Stone, symbolized by the circle, has the ability to bring back the dead, albeit as mere shadows of their former selves. The stone emphasizes the desire to reconnect with the deceased and the potential dangers of meddling with the natural order of life and death. And lastly, the Invisibility Cloak, depicted as the triangle, grants its wearer the power to be invisible. In the tale, it symbolizes the acceptance of one's inevitable mortality, as the third brother ultimately uses it to evade death until he is ready to embrace it. Although the Tale of the Three Brothers is a fictitious story within the series, it serves as an allegory for the human desire to overcome, control, or escape death. As such, the figure of death and its portrayal in the tale represents the natural force that all living beings must face. It also stresses the timeless message of accepting one's mortality and the perils of attempting to subvert the natural course of life. And though death is a fictitious character even within the magical world, I can't help but wonder if there's some truth to the Tale of the Three Brothers, particularly as all three Hallows have proven to be very much real. The Veil, much like the Deathly Hallows in the tale, seems to possess incomprehensible qualities related to life, death, and the afterlife. Its enigmatic nature and connection to death might imply that an entity as potent as death itself could be behind its existence. A veil is even mentioned in the Tale of the Three Brothers when describing the second brother's resurrected fiancée. Yet she was silent and cold, separated from him as though by a veil. But I'm certainly not ignorant to the fact that the existence of some tangible form of death opens up a whole other can of worms. Death gave all three brothers one of the fabled Deathly Hallows, and they all had their own unique fate. But it also seems like, regardless of the decisions that the brothers made or the actions that they took, they ultimately all faced death once again, and the way that it's depicted in the story shows them physically encountering this same personification of death that they faced in the beginning. If the tale is real and Beedle the Bard was simply retelling an aspect of history, how did he know about what had happened? What did he really know of the relationship between death and the brothers? Was it fact or fiction? One thing to consider is that the tales of Beedle the Bard continually reinforce that these stories are in fact the author's original creations. However, that certainly doesn't mean that Beedle did not draw inspiration from his real-life experiences, the things that he had done, or the people that he had met. J.K. Rowling supplies the following foreword to the book. If his stories accurately reflect his opinions, he rather liked muggles, whom he regarded as ignorant rather than malevolent. He mistrusted dark magic, and he believed that the worst excesses of wizard kind sprang from the all-too-human traits of cruelty, apathy, or arrogant misapplication of their own talents. The heroes and heroines who triumph in his stories are not those with the most powerful magic, but rather those who demonstrate the most kindness, common sense, and ingenuity. There's little evidence to support either argument, that these stories were fabricated entirely, or that Beedle drew inspiration from something that he had witnessed in his life. However, given that the Hallows actually exist, I'm willing to bet that it was the latter. We know the three Hallows genuinely exist, and that can be confirmed, but was the personification of a deathly figure just Beedle adding his own spin to the story, or was Death a real wizard? This is where it gets tricky. As it stands, there is no proof that suggests that Death personified is indeed real. His existence is only mentioned in one work, and it's a fictional one. To say that Death exists because of this one book for children is a stretch, particularly as the existence of the Hallows is the only real argument one could make for his existence, and there could be many ways that the Hallows themselves were created. Albus Dumbledore didn't seem to have much faith in the validity of Death's existence. "So it's true?" asked Harry. "All of it? The Peverell brothers? Were the three brothers of the tale?" said Dumbledore, nodding. "Oh yes, I think so. Whether they met Death on a lonely road, I think it more likely that the Peverell brothers were simply gifted, dangerous wizards who succeeded in creating those powerful objects. The story of them being Death's own Hallows seems to me the sort of legend that might have sprung up around such creations." It's hard to answer the question as to whether or not Death truly existed. There are many powerful artifacts in the Harry Potter universe, and the Hallows, though powerful, don't seem outside the realm of possibility for other powerful witches and wizards. With that said, if Death truly was responsible for creating the three Hallows, I'd be willing to bet that he was also responsible for the creation of the Veil. One other closing thought is that the Veil and the Resurrection Stone from the tale of the three brothers have undeniable similarities. Both objects serve as gateways or barriers between those who are living and dead. The only difference is the achievable level of communication. With the stone, you can generate actual physical shades that you can directly interact with. Whereas with the Veil, it has been expressed that you can only hear, if you listen closely, those from the land of the dead. We know that when Cadmus, the brother who picks the stone, and Death have their interaction, the stone that Death gives Cadmus was simply picked up from the riverbank. Whether Death enchanted that stone right then and there is up for you to decide, but given that the Veil is constantly described as crumbling, cracked, and so ancient that it's barely able to stand, I think that the Resurrection Stone is perhaps just a piece that broke off. It may seem like a bit of a stretch, but I think there's got to be some kind of connection.
And that's it for today's video. If you enjoy the content, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Until next time, remember, it does not do to dwell on dreams and forget to live.